So with that, I'm going to call this morning's meeting to order. So I'm going to turn over to Susanna Maureen to do a quick roll call. And then we do have, we do need to make an amendment to the agenda. So I will be asking at the conclusion of the roll call, I'm going to ask for an amendment to add an item to welcome our newest member, Tammy Kolbe, so that I can administer the oath of office. So with that, Maureen or Suzanne, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Yes, Chair, this is Maureen. I will call the roll. Just for the record, it's in randomized order, so no offense to anyone where you are in the order. But Patrick Brown?
Yes, present. Hello.
Tom Lovett? Jenna O'Farrell?
Here.
Analita Pena?
Here.
Tammy Kolbe?
Present.
Jennifer Samuelson?
Here. Morning.
Lyle Jepson?
Here.
Kim Gleason?
Here.
Oliver Olson?
Present.
Gabrielle Lucci?
Gabrielle, I think you're muted.
I can see you, Gabrielle, but I didn't.
I'm sorry, there was a lag. I'm here.
And Dan French.
I'm here. Good morning.
Maureen, good morning. This is Tom Lovett. I'm on the phone. I can't get Teams to work, but I'm here.
Okay, I thought I called you second. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, Tom, and you're not the only one struggling with Teams this morning, so I appreciate you dialing in nonetheless. So with that, I do want to make a slight adjustment to the agenda. Board announcements. I'd like to actually move that up before we get to public to be heard. So we're just going to reverse the order of items B and D. And I'd also, as I indicated, would entertain a motion at this time to add an agenda item immediately following item A to formally welcome Tammy Kolbe as our newest member and to administer the oath of office.
I will so move.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Jen Samuelson and seconded by Lyle Jepson to amend the agenda to add the additional item to welcome Tammy Kolbe and to administer the oath of office. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of adopting the motion, please signify by saying yes.
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 And those opposed signify by saying no. Any abstentions? Hearing none, it appears that the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. You've adopted the motion, so we've amended the agenda. So with that, I'm going to move on to our newest agenda item, which is to formally welcome Tammy Kolbe as our newest member of the board. As you know, Kathy Lavoie stepped down from the board recently, and I do want to acknowledge her service to the board, and we'll plan to do something at our next meeting to acknowledge and recognize her service. But today, I just want to welcome Tammy. So Tammy, I think first, if you wouldn't mind just briefly introducing yourself, and then after that, I will administer the oath of office.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tammy Kolbe. and I'm an associate professor of educational leadership and policy studies at the University of Vermont. I was honored to be nominated by the governor to the board, and I'm very much looking forward to working with you on these the issues that come before us, which are, extremely important to public education in the state of Vermont. So thank you for the warm welcome.
Excellent. So Tammy, I'm going to read to you the oath of office, which is in two parts. So the first is an affirmation of allegiance, and then the second part is an affirmation of office. So I will read you the first part, and at the end, if you accept, you simply say I do, and the same for the second part. Do you, Tammy Kolbe, do solemnly affirm that you will be true and faithful to the state of Vermont, and that you will not directly or indirectly do any act or thing injurious to the Constitution or government thereof, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Now the affirmation of office. You, Tammy Kolbe, do solemnly affirm that you will faithfully execute the office of member of the State Board of Education and will therein do equal right and justice to all persons to the best of your judgment and ability according to law, under the pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
Congratulations and welcome to the State Board of Education.
Thank you.
So the next item, I do want to take up board announcements, and I briefly want to address an issue that's come up that I'd like to speak to you all as board members as it's come up. So there was an accusation made by former Secretary of Education Rebecca Holcomb a few days ago concerning comments that I made in a local school district. I did send out a note to all of you just before this meeting with a screenshot of the comments that Dr. Holcomb made about me. And I've also included a transcript of my actual comments. And as you can see from the transcript and the record of the meeting, her accusation is absolutely false. And I'm a little, obviously, a little concerned that this has come up and has created a bit of a distraction. But it's also a good inflection point for all of us as board members. Many of us wear many hats, serve on different boards, serve in different capacities. And as private citizens, members of our communities, we have a constitutional right to speak on matters that we think are important, and indeed have an obligation as citizens to speak. But we should always be mindful of our position and be clear about when we're speaking as a private individual and when we're speaking on behalf of the board. I feel quite strongly that in this particular instance, I was very clear about the capacity in which I was speaking. And more specifically, I was not taking an advocacy position as Dr. Holcomb alleges. But I welcome feedback from all of you if you've had a chance to review the material I've sent you, and if folks feel that somehow I've acted inappropriately, I'm more than happy to step aside as the chair of the board. I don't think it's appropriate for me to continue on as the chair if I don't have the support of the board. So with that, Jen, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. For what it's worth, I think, and I appreciate you sending this email out earlier, Oliver, and I especially including the transcript of what you said as well as the link. I I'm not going to speak to what you said because I think what you said was very clear, in my opinion, that you're, speaking in your personal capacity, not as the chair of the board, and just, clarifying some of the things that were put out in that mailer. So I think what you wrote is clear. So I won't address that. Speaking as the chair of the Independent Schools Rule 2200 series, I just want to reiterate that the committee right now is in formal APA rulemaking process to implement changes to the rules that have been mandated by Act 173. Which I will be speaking to later on in the meeting this morning. But as a part of that, the subcommittee has looked at this issue of discrimination, equity, and what are the requirements for independent schools. And I, certainly think that there's room there to tighten it. But what I will say is that, we have been in contact with the Human Rights Commission, and, clearly there is a rule on the books right now, and it is 9 VSA section 4501 that prohibits any school, restaurant, store, establishment, or other facility at which services, facilities, goods, privileges, benefits, or accommodation are offered to the general public. And that has been interpreted to include all schools. So I think it could certainly be clearer. And our current rules also require a school, independent school, to show that it satisfies lawful requirements relative to its facilities. And that's current rule 2226.8. With the changes to the rule, that will be new 2227.8. But, certainly those rules are there. I think they could probably be relied upon more strongly by people who feel strongly that they should be. So anyway, thank you for raising this issue. And I think it just highlights that as a board, probably we need to do more work to make it clear, what the rules are and how people can access them.
Thank you, Jen. Jenna. And you're on mute. There you go.
I know, I'm getting there. Oliver, I did not have the opportunity to read everything you sent this morning, but I appreciate your transparency and forthcoming this morning to kind of hold space for that and open up to dialogue for conversation. So appreciative of that. And then Jen, I just wanted to clarify, when you said all schools, are you referring to all schools that receive public funds or all schools who are independent, recognized or independent schools? And because I don't have that in front of me either. Just clear.
Okay, I'm off mute. So I was citing 9 VSA section 45, which, we're sort of putting the cart before the horse. I don't think that there has ever been a legal challenge pursuant to the statute. All I can tell you is what the statute says, and I think it would be up to a court to determine its applicability. But, by its language, it does define a public, a place of public accommodation. And the understanding is that any school that is open to the public is a place of public accommodation. So that has, I will say, I don't believe that has been tested in a court of law, but that rule is on the books.
Thank you. Kim.
Thanks, Oliver. I, as many of us maybe, had received a lot of outreach on this concern. And while I'm certainly appreciative of your leadership, and we've shared time together on the 2200 series, and I am most definitely not asking for you to step down as chair, I am very, very concerned about the injection into this local conversation. And even by your own transcript, your introduction is as the State Board of Ed chair, and we all know in the many hats that we wear, our ability to disclaim our statewide official roles and then state otherwise is a challenge to perception. and perception matters. And on matters that may later become or are something over which our board, a state board, has ultimate say or control, such as the rules on independent schools, I think it was unnecessary to have injected yourself into this local conversation. And I would like for us to really think, all of us, about our responsibilities in this regard, because I think it compromises our credibility as a board to operate independently or without preconceived positions on matters. And so I know you and I have spoken, Oliver. I think those concerns are very real, and I don't feel that they are necessarily, I am not reacting to Rebecca's tweets as much as the minutes. I certainly saw all of that, but it's called attention to a concern, and I think we need to think about our norms and practices among us in this regard. We don't need to challenge our credibility on these matters, particularly as sensitive as they are. We have a lot of work.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Well, I hear what Kim is saying, but I guess, my thought is we live in a small state and even smaller communities. And I'm just trying to imagine, if Oliver were to have called in and just said, "Hi, I'm Oliver Olson," and not mentioned in, his grounds for the knowledge that he was providing. I mean, how would he have that level of knowledge? And I didn't take Oliver's comments to be opining on, what the town should or shouldn't do. What I saw was him clarifying some misinformation that was included in the flyer. But how would he have known that other than in his capacity as a member of the State Board of Education? So I guess I hear what you're saying, but I'm just wondering, in my own work, I'm fairly careful. I try to say, personally, I think blah, 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 so that it's clear that I'm not speaking in an official capacity. But we all have information that we acquire through the different jobs that we do. And I think that's valid. I don't think that's, something that we shouldn't put out there as a grounds for, any authority on which we speak.
Kim.
I think, we can't undo what's been done, but we certainly could have asked the AOE to send clarification if there was clarification to have been sent. There was, a reference to personal experience. There was much reference to the position as State Board of Ed chair, and even not mentioning one's authority as State Board of Ed chair or otherwise. There, as you said, Jennifer, it's a small state, and the need to have injected into that conversation, knowing the multiple hats we wear and the sensitivity to the matter, I think there would have been any number of other ways to have approached it that would have left an arm's length that could have clarified the record without it coming from the State Board of Ed chair.
Okay. Thanks, Kim. Lyle.
I've been called way worse, thanks. So we do live in a small state, and quite frankly, I find myself often starting comments when people are talking about education with, just for clarification, I need to let you know up front, this is my role. And I also do, I think what Oliver did, which was he said, this is my role and this is my personal experience. We can't, as hard as we try, we often can't switch the hats as often as we would like to. I think Oliver tried to do that. I have, like Jenna, I haven't been able to read everything this morning. My apologies. But at first blush, I would hate to inflate an issue beyond what's necessary. And so I appreciate the conversation, appreciate Oliver bringing it up, but I think we need to move on.
Okay. Kim, Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Good thing I moved my hands when I talked. So I guess, again, and simply looking forward, I think making decisions about where we put ourselves in conversations is really important. That was a decision to be in that conversation versus being incidentally part of a conversation, that you can share perspectives from the technical background of one who's been working with it in a state Board of Ed hat. In this case, it was an action to make a decision to be there and offer thoughts on a matter over which we ultimately have control on this board. So I invite us to really think very seriously about our responsibilities in that and how we make those choices moving forward. We can't afford the compromise to our credibility on matters over which we ultimately have control.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Kim. Alrighty, with that, we'll move on and take up public to be heard. So are there any members of the public who wish to address the board? I think I hear someone.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, hi. I'm sorry. I don't know what the procedure is, but I'm a member of the public who would like to speak.
Absolutely. If you could just state your name, the town you're from, and what you wish to speak about, and then if you could just hold until I have an opportunity to see if there are any other members of the public who wish to speak, and then once we have a sense of how many people want to speak, we'll take folks in turn.
Okay, perfect. My name is Tanya Scuteri, and I live in Shoreham, Vermont, and I wanted to speak regarding item J, the Ripton and ACSD item.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to address the board? Alrighty, I'm not hearing anyone else. So with that, Tanya, you have the floor, and if you could offer your comments, that would be wonderful. Tanya,
okay, great. I'm just sorry. I think I'm unmuted now.
You're unmuted. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So again, my name is Tanya Scuteri, and I'm here today to speak in regards to item J, the Ripton and ACSD agenda item. I'm an ACSD community member and a former elementary school board member. And while I do understand that none of the options laid out by Secretary French are ideal, I offer my support today for option 1 to create a new supervisory union to provide services to RSC and ACSD. The students of Ripton will attend MUMS and MUHS, which are the middle and high schools of ACSD. So a supervisory union that serves both ACSD and RSD will provide the most stability and continuity of services for the students of both the districts. I appreciate the concerns of the ACSD board, but also know it is imperative that the decision be based on what is best for our students and not based on administrative convenience. And while statute does not stipulate a minimum size for a school district, as Secretary French states in his memo, it is likely that Ripton would be too small a system to perform some of the supervisory union duties itself in an efficient and effective manner. And while option 1 does not completely align with the stated goals of Act 46, it appears to be the best option that comes closest to meeting those goals and is the option that provides the most operational efficiency and will ensure the most equity in terms of the quality and variety of educational opportunities of the 3 structures. Thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Tanya. And we did receive your written comment as well. So thank you for submitting that.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So next on the agenda, I don't think we had any other members of the public. So I'm going to move us along to item C, which is the consent agenda, and would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay. Lyle Jepson has moved the consent agenda. Is there a second?
I second.
Tammy Kolbe has seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to the vote. All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda, please signify by saying yes.
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 And those
Yes.
opposed, please signify by saying no. Any abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you've adopted the consent agenda. So with that, that brings us to item E, which is the student report. So I'm going to turn it over to our two student members for a presentation. So Angelita or Gabrielle, would either of you like to take the floor?
I can go first.
Yep.
So hello everyone. It feels like it's been a while. It's been a very busy few weeks. School's up and running. We're starting to get in the schedule. I'm also kind of happy to say that I really don't have too big of an update because everything has been running surprisingly smoothly. We haven't had any mask problems, which has been absolutely amazing. I will say we had a case that did expose a lot of kids, but thankfully a majority of our school is vaccinated and our school handled it very well and everything is running just as it typically would. My anxiety about the number of kids coming back full time, that was also handled very well. You know, at the beginning of the year, teachers were like, hey, things are going to be very different. We're all kind of in this together, which was very put you at ease. And yeah, it's been surprisingly good. It's nice to socialize, and I think teachers and staff at schools, my school at least, has been doing extremely well in handling students that are struggling or have been behind and catching them up from last year, and then, you know, making sure we're getting everything we need in this year. And then, of course, I have a draft of a survey I'm hoping will be helpful to highlight the benefits. It won't be that long, but I think with what little I'm hoping it will bring, or just some information that we'll have, you know, it will be beneficial for us to see what helps students and what didn't help students, and just that information overall. So it's a short kind of gist of what's been going on, but yeah, that's basically it.
Excellent. Thank you. Gabrielle.
So we've also gone back to school in the last few weeks, and I'd like to say that all the students seem to be really happy to, you know, be back in the building full time and seeing so many of their friends again. I can say that the atmosphere seems to be a very joyful one for all the students, and I think that the teachers are glad to have the kids back as well. We haven't had too many issues with masks. Kids are usually very good about wearing them, although occasionally we will have the issue sometimes of students in class lowering it below their nose, or somewhere in another like area of the school that can happen where kids will not want to keep their masks on for a while. But if that happens, we usually just, if it's not in a classroom, we usually just tell them they can step outside and have a mask break. So other than that, things have been going super well, and I'm just glad that everyone's happy to be back.
Excellent. Wonderful. Speaking of kids in school, I neglected to mention I have a sick third grader at home with me today, and I may need to duck away for a moment or two during the course of the meeting, and of course would ask the vice chair to step in and take over if that's needed. So with that, I think we can move on to item F, which is for an update on the Rules Series 2200 subcommittee work. So Jen, if you wouldn't mind providing us an update on that.
Great. Sure. Thank you. So I included a summary of the committee's work to date in the agenda packet. I think a lot of us at this point are sort of aware of these steps in the process that this subcommittee has taken, but I thought it would be helpful to put it together, particularly for our new board members, as well as for members of the public. But basically, the Rule Series 2200 has been opened. We're currently in the formal APA rulemaking process, largely prompted by Act 173 of 2018, which was passed by the legislature, relating to enhancing the effectiveness, availability, and equity of services provided to students who require additional support. So on the heels of Act 173, there was an Act 173 advisory group that was formed, comprised of various stakeholders. And that group met almost monthly to implement the bulk of the changes that are now currently part of what is being put through the public hearing process. In addition to that, we had a Rule Series 2200 subcommittee that was formed to really look at some of what we identified as quick wins that we could attach to the Act 173 train, if you will. And then there was an additional working group that was put together of various stakeholders with regard to the rate setting for therapeutic independent schools. So all of those meetings sort of coalesced in the rules that we proposed and approved provisionally back in May. We had a hearing before ICAR early July, and we are now right on the cusp of our second public hearing comment period this afternoon. So if anyone from the public or the state board would care to join, the information is actually, I didn't provide it in, oh no, I did. It is in the agenda packet. But additionally, people can go to the State Board of Education website and from there pull up upcoming meetings, and there's a link right there. So certainly we would welcome anyone who wants to come and listen. We did not have a subcommittee meeting after our first public comment hearing, just because of, I guess, summer would be the easiest answer. It just got a little bit complicated. And I think Emily is here and is willing to provide a brief update on the comments that were received. It was mostly the Agency of Education as well as one member of the public. And then of course, anyone from the public can also email comments to sbe.publiccomment@vermont.gov. That's also provided in the agenda packet. So we will have our next subcommittee meeting next Wednesday at 11 a.m. just to review the first two public comment hearings, and then we will provide an update at the next state board meeting in October. So Emily, do you want to review the comments that we've received so far?
Sure, it doesn't take long. So at the first public comment hearing, we had one member of the public speak. I've captured those comments in my spreadsheet where I'm tracking all of them. They were on a few points. One notable was around the issue you discussed earlier, the Public Accommodations Act. The agency presented public comment. I believe that's posted on the website. I presented a whole list of cleanup issues that the committee itself had identified as helpful or improvements on the draft. And I presented those as agency comments so that they could be on equal footing with any other comments from members of the public. Donna Russo-Savage spoke specifically to some of the Rule Series 7000 moving pieces that you'll hear about later in this same agenda. So there's not anything novel that we've heard so far in public comment. I am tracking those, and when we have more of a critical mass of comments, I'll be summarizing those for the board in a presentation of themes that are emerging in public comment. But right now, just 3.
Great. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or.
Well, I just an observation that, this, the whole process, starting with the stakeholder group, the advisory group, this has been a multi-year endeavor, and I think a really collaborative and constructive one that led to consensus amongst a very broad group of stakeholders. So I firmly believe that we've established a really good model for how to operate, and the fact that, I think it's important that we do, hear from the public and make every effort we can to solicit public comment. But the fact that, we have not heard much from the public, and particularly from some, key stakeholders, is really a testament to the collaborative work amongst such a wide variety of stakeholders leading up to the formal rulemaking process. So I just, Tammy, as a new member coming online, I realize there's a ton of stuff being thrown at you right now. So I just want to make sure we offer you an opportunity, to ask any clarifying questions that you might have.
Thank you for that opportunity. Having just received lots of these materials yesterday, I'm still getting my head around things. I am quite certain I will have lots of clarifying questions, and I'm hopeful, in particular, Jen and others, if I reach out to you to have some one-on-one conversations, so I can really understand the process that's been undertaken, sort of the next steps. But thank you, Oliver. I appreciate you giving me opportunity now to ask questions. I'm just not sure yet what those questions might be. So thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Good. Any other questions or comments on agenda item F? Okay, so I think that's a good segue into agenda item G, which is an update on Rule Series 7000, a close cousin to Rule Series 2200.
Hi, this is Donna. Good morning, all.
Morning.
This is a follow-up to some action that you took, or excuse me, some information that we provided to you at your last meeting regarding one of the comments that we made as an agency to the Rule 2200 series. You'll remember that Rule 2223 allows accrediting agencies to stand in for a process through you to accredit individual independent schools. And that Rule 2223 refers to one of the rules in the 7000 series, in which there is a list of the recognized accrediting agencies. As part of the comments to the 2200 series, we suggested that a specific reference to ASNE be included in 2223 so that could happen as quickly as possible. This was something that the 2200 subcommittee had been considering, and also that a change be made to 2223 that would indicate your intention to repeal the 7000 series in the coming years, and have all of the independent school issues be dealt with in the 2200 series rather than by a reference to another series. So there is a one-page green sheet for item G, where we're taking the next step in what we think is your plan for this whole process, and that is to make a couple of changes to the entire Rule 7000 series. One of the changes would be to immediately repeal all of the 7,000 rules that don't have something to do with that list of accrediting agencies. All of those other rules merely refer to another rule or to a statute that deals with the subject. There's no new information in them, and they're just superfluous. The other more substantive change would be in, and I'm looking at effective July 1, 2024, that you would also repeal that list of accrediting agencies that you have recognized. And that would give both the accrediting agencies and the independent schools that receive their accrediting through those agencies to be able to comment to you about what they're doing, and it would give you the time also in the second phase of your amendments to the 2200 series to decide whether you want to either list those accrediting agencies in the 2200 series, or whether instead you want to create some sort of a process by which accrediting agencies would be recognized, and then keep the list something outside of the rules themselves, which would make it easier to add to and delete that list, items from that list. So this is asking if this is still the process that you want to go forward. This is the next step in that process, and we were suggesting that you might want to authorize us to pre-file, the proposed amendments to Rule 7000 if this is the way that you want to continue to proceed.
Jen, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think Donna did a pretty good job of sort of reminding us where we were and where we're going. And so, basically right now, we have a list in 7320 of accrediting agencies. And I think, as a subcommittee, the direction that we would like to move is, instead of having a list of names that's been, basically put into the rule, that we would have more of a process in place in the rule with, sort of on the website, a list of accrediting agencies that meet those requirements at that time. And I think the benefit of doing that is, instead of getting wedded to a particular organization, we're really looking more at the process that's being utilized by any accrediting agency that would be recognized by the State Board of Education. So I think Donna's sort of striking a good balance of, forecasting what's going to happen in 3 years. That certainly gives the subcommittee time to develop what those rules might look like and really tease that out. So, I mean, I think this is a pretty nice balance that we've struck.
Excellent.
May I just add, if you, yes. I'm sorry. I was just going to add that if you do decide to go forward with this, I had just chosen Monday, November 1st at 10 o'clock as the time for the public hearing, because it seemed like a good time that was far enough out, but not too far. And that was just something I randomly chose. So if that doesn't, isn't agreeable, and if you see something else, we can certainly make a change to the APA forms and change it to a different date.
Excellent. So just again, there are a lot of moving. Oh, Lyle.
Just maybe not a quick question. My apologies. So, so my assumption is, prior to 2024, that the committee will have procedures in place for people to what would appear to be reapplying to be on the list, and that there would be criteria created that would basically be, I would assume, a checkbox of you've done this, you've done this, you've done this, so you would be allowed to continue to be on this list or be added to this list. Am I oversimplifying that?
Jen?
I think conceptually you're on the right track. The problem that I sort of see with the way things are set up right now is, you've got a list of organizations in 7320. I think we all are experiencing firsthand that opening up a rule series is a pretty cumbersome and time-consuming process. So I don't know when the last time 7320 was updated. As a subcommittee, we're not sure that some of the organizations that are listed in 7320 still exist, or if they are even accrediting any schools in Vermont. So that's part of the work that we need to do. So yeah, conceptually what we would do is create the framework of what an organization would need to do in order to be recognized by the State Board of Ed as an accrediting agency. And, if an organization meets that framework that we will establish, then there would be a separate, tab on our webpage that basically would list a current list of accrediting agencies.
Which would not need to go through rulemaking. It would be procedural.
Correct. The framework would go through rulemaking. So if there were ever changes to the framework, we would have to open up the rule. But as far as any organizations that would satisfy that framework, that would not have to go through rulemaking. And so that it just seems to be a more nimble way to approach it.
Great. Thank you.
And there's a pretty good model for this in at least one other state, the state of Connecticut. They have this framework that's out there that we can look to that is, essentially establishes the standards expected of an external accreditor. So we have something that we can look at and put that through our rulemaking process, put our sort of own Vermont spin on things. And then, as Jen pointed out, as conditions change and their, accreditors come and go, we can be rather quick and nimble, but the board will be constrained in its recognition of those external creditors by the standards that have been established and have gone through the rigorous rulemaking process. The other thing I want to point out, an expectation that we've discussed, and I think hopefully are all clear on, is that these external accreditors are really good at looking at educational programs, governance, financial capacity, things of that nature. This is what they do. But there will be certain things that we as a state want to hold close, and I'm thinking of things that have to do with health and safety of students, civil rights, things like that are likely not appropriate to delegate away, and where there's a particular state interest in making sure that we're really double clicking into those issues and making sure we're comfortable. Tammy.
Thank you, Oliver. You may have, this is a clarifying question and you may have already answered it, but I was just making sure that in this move that we were still leaving ourselves the flexibility to add or amend standards in addition to what the accrediting bodies would be applying, and also that the state board will retain both a responsibility for determining applying that framework and determining who's on that list that ends up on the tab. Are both of those, am I understanding on both of those points that we will have the flexibility to expand the rubric that is used to evaluate independent schools beyond just what the accrediting agencies do, and the state board will continue to have the ability to make the decision and apply that rubric and decide who's on the list and who's not on the list?
Rather than give you a binary answer, I think I'll play it back to you and tell me if this makes sense. Because I think we need to be cautious. We're talking about two different standards. So let me separate those out. So there are currently standards that govern the approval of independent schools. So those are standards that the board needs to look at when we make decisions about whether we're going to approve a school. So we have standards today. We will continue to have standards, and we'll continue to sort of see those standards evolve over time through the rulemaking process. So that's one thing. What's new and different, and what we've not had historically, is a set of standards that govern how we determine which external accreditors we will recognize. So that's what's new and different. So that when we say, for example, NEASC, we're going to say that we recognize your accreditation process and that it has value and can stand in for a number of elements of the criteria that we look at for approval of independent schools, with certain exceptions. So it's sort of a little bit overlapping, but hopefully, does that help explain?
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Wonderful. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Jen. You're on mute.
Thank you. Do we need a motion at this point to move this forward?
We will, yes.
Okay.
So let me just turn to Jenna real quick, and then
Sorry, just a quick concern, and maybe this isn't a concern of the board, but under economic impact of this rule, would there be a consideration for the financial cost that independent schools would then accrue for this process? I think I brought this up before, but I don't know if this is relevant to this discussion or not.
It is.
Schools do not have to pay to be an independent school to work with the Agency of Education, and there would be a significant cost.
And that is, you're right to bring that up. It is an important consideration because under today's model, a school does not have to be accredited by a third-party accrediting agency, and the agency effectively performs that work at no charge. So the model that we're moving towards is one where we want all approved independent schools to have to be accredited by an external accreditor, which will require an expenditure of funds by those schools. The way that we're addressing some of these concerns, and I think the specific concern is with NEASC and the cost of the NEASC accreditation process. One of the particularly excuse me, somebody's on the phone. Number ending in 76, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself. The smaller, typically elementary schools find that the cost of the NEASC evaluation process is burdensome, and that's one of the reasons why the subcommittee has been looking at some other accrediting agencies that have a lower sort of price point. And ACSD in particular is one that does that. So yes, there will be a cost, and the committee has had quite a bit of discussion about that issue. Jen, did you want to add anything else to that?
No, other than to say, really, Jenna, that's a good point, and that is exactly why ACSD is being included in Rule 2223 as part of, I think that was one of the changes that the Agency of Education brought forward at our last public comment hearing, because it does have a lower price point. But it's really dependent on the number of students in a school. I think that's the primary determinant of the cost. So it ends up being a more affordable option for smaller elementary K-8 schools. So yes, there would be a cost moving forward with this model that we're considering. But my sense of the cost of some of these accrediting agencies is that it would be at a price point that I think most schools would be able to afford, but certainly that's what the public comment period is for.
Yeah. All righty. So with that, I am going to entertain a motion to pre-file the 7000 series rule amendments with ICAR.
So moved.
Okay. Tom Lovett has moved, and is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Jen Samuelson has seconded. Is there any discussion? Alrighty. All those in favor of adopting the motion, please signify by saying yes.
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 Okay. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. Are there any abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you've adopted the motion. So with that, that brings us to agenda item H, which I think is probably the most exciting agenda item we have today, and that is to hear presentations from candidates for Vermont Teacher of the Year. So, Mr. Secretary, is Patrick or someone else from your agency on the phone wants to sort of introduce our candidates?
If I may, this is Patrick Halliday. I'm the Director of the Education Quality Division. Thanks for providing this time for our 3 finalists. Just very, very briefly, I'll say, what a great process to go through, to read all the applications, to go through the interviews. We have 3 finalists that the committee has brought forward who are all amazing, and we interviewed 4 other people who are all incredibly thoughtful and innovative educators here in Vermont. So it was just a great experience to go through. A quick acknowledgement of the committee is made up of previous teachers of the year who put in lots of time reviewing applications, sitting through interviews during the first couple weeks of the school year, which is a really difficult time. So I want to call out attention, particularly to our current Susan Rosado and Susan Koch, who I believe is 2016, and Tom Payer, who went through all of the applications. Tom was the 2019 Vermont Teacher of the Year. As not to take up more time from the board, we have 3 folks who are 3 finalists who are here, and I'm just going to do a quick introduction, really quick introduction of all 3 of them, and then I will turn it back to you, Chair Olson, to invite Karen to make her presentation. We have Karen McCalla, who is a library and tech integrationist at Mill River Middle and High School in Mill River Union. We have Kyle Chadburn, who's a middle grade humanities teacher at Orleans Elementary and Orleans Central Supervisory Union. And we have Susanna Cowden, who is a high school science teacher at Harwood Union Middle and High School. So those are our 3 finalists, and I think you'll enjoy their brief presentations that they put together. Without any further, I'll turn it back to you.
Excellent. So board members, you should all have, and as I'm thinking about it now, Tammy, perhaps you may not have, there's a rubric that was mailed out a few days ago with an online form that you can fill out during each presentation as part of this assessment process. So I just want to make sure everybody has that in front of them, and Tammy particularly, I want to make sure you have it. Okay, good. Everybody has that? Okay, wonderful. So with that, I think we're going to, sounds like we're going to start with Karen McCalla. Are you with us?
I am. Thank you so much for having me. I have some slides to share if that's okay.
That would be wonderful. So,
all right. So give me just 1 second to pick the right one. Here we go. So I'm Karen McCalla, the Teacher of the Year candidate from Mill River. And we're just south of Rutland. And my platform is STEAM for All. So STEAM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. My platform has 4 pillars: connect, contribute, support, and amplify. Connecting successful STEAM classrooms and makerspaces leads to economies of scale and more equity when we use best practices as models. Connecting helps to lighten the load that teachers face. We're not reinventing the wheel, we're sharing it. We'll develop a clearinghouse of easy to implement maker projects contributed by teacher makers across the state. A team will work to unpack standards and competencies addressed by each project to support easy use with personalized learning plans. We need high-quality STEAM professional development that's available to all, and state-level support to integrate community makerspaces into the pre-K through 12 pipeline. We also need additional community makerspaces distributed equitably across our state. We need to tell the story of making in our schools, to engage with communities and share success. These compelling stories help us to build bridges across diverse populations. STEAM is a topic everyone can get behind. My connection to STEAM learning is broad and deep. I'm a lifelong Vermonter and mom to 17-year-old twins. I'm the teacher librarian at Mill River, where I've taught for over 20 years. I won the ISTE Making It Happen Award in 2018, and in 2019 was named the Vermont Tech Jam Tech Champion. I'm a passionate maker and STEAM advocate, and I'm the executive director and maker evangelist at the MINT, Rutland's community makerspace. I've been a FIRST robotics coach for upper elementary and middle school students since 2013, and have mentored at the high school level since 2017. As first founder Dean Kamen says, we're not using kids to build robots. We're using robots to build kids. Well-planned and delivered STEAM education helps build well-rounded kids with robust skills that apply to all areas of life. My STEAM connection has also taken me and the Rutland area robotics teams to World Finals and the Legoland Invitational multiple times. More countries are represented at the first World Finals than at the Winter Olympics. As a librarian, I connect students with stories that are windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Windows help us see into others' experiences. Mirrors reflect our place in the world back at us. Sliding glass doors allow us to step through and imagine our lives differently. Libraries are hubs and connections in schools and throughout communities, and librarians are best positioned to take STEAM education to the next level in Vermont. Amplifying the STEAM message throughout Vermont and beyond. All students need the opportunity to create, innovate, and solve problems, to learn from their mistakes, and to iterate. The iterative design process is crucial to problem solving in our classrooms, our makerspaces, and in life. School and community makerspaces and STEAM programming are filling the gap caused by the loss of industrial arts and family and consumer science in many Vermont schools. Without these hands-on classes, students not attending a CTE center need other avenues for making physical products, prototyping, and learning basic tool use. School and community makerspaces give students the chance to innovate without the pressure of evaluation or grades, but with the support of skilled educators. This is truly low-risk, high-reward, highly personalized learning. Traditionally, gender equity was seen as the largest issue in STEAM education and careers, but the equity issue in STEAM is much broader. Socioeconomically disadvantaged students are much less likely to have STEAM support at home, and access to high-quality STEAM opportunities pre-K through 12 is unevenly distributed throughout our state. Equitable STEAM learning in classrooms and makerspaces gives all our students access to low-floor, high-ceiling learning. STEAM learning broadens opportunities for students to show their learning and access flexible pathways. It creates additional lanes for students to travel when demonstrating what they know and can do. STEAM learning is a bridge for students to engagement in school, career paths, entrepreneurship, and life. If I'm given the honor of being the first school librarian chosen as Vermont Teacher of the Year, I'll spend my time creating deeper connections, supporting teachers and learners, contributing to the growth of Vermont's economic resiliency, and forging new community school partnerships, amplifying the amazing work of STEAM educators and students across the state. Thank you so much for your time. Do you have any questions for me?
That was wonderful. 5 minutes on the money. Alrighty.
I believe we have Kyle Chadburn joining us. I will say that Kyle lost power this morning due to thunderstorms, and I think that he was able to get back up, but I just wanted to give that as a little caveat for him.
Excellent. So Kyle, are you with us, and are you able to fully participate?
I am with you via video, and as of right now, I'm able to fully participate, and I hope it remains that way. It looks okay right now.
Okay, and just so you know, if for some reason you lose power, I'm more than happy to make some other arrangements so that you have equal opportunity here. So,
thank you for that. I also have some slides I was going to share. I'm not sure if Karen has to.
Karen, yeah. If you could stop sharing, Karen, and then.
So
Kyle.
sorry. There you go.
No worries. I'm learning all kinds of new things with Teams as well. So, all right. So, I'm not going to guarantee that I will be as good on time as Karen was, but I will do my very best. So I'm Kyle Chadburn, middle level humanities teacher at Orleans Elementary School up in the Northeast Kingdom. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come in and go through this process and to present to you folks today. one of the things that I really love about these opportunities is the chance to be reflective as an educator and go back through and look at what I've been doing and what I can do better. And it's a really great way of taking stock and being able to move my practice forward. So thank you so much for the opportunity. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about why I feel that I would make a good candidate for Teacher of the Year and share a little bit of what I've been working on in the 10 years that I've been in the classroom here in Vermont. I work in a town that is near and dear to me. I grew up in the Northeast Kingdom. I graduated from one of our local elementary schools in this supervisory union. I graduated from our unionized high school, Lake Region. And so I've been very tied to this community throughout my entire life. And I've tried to bring as much to my profession as I can. So a quick overview of sort of what my qualifications are as a candidate for Teacher of the Year. My focus and my platform would be mostly on how can we increasingly make our system as student-centered as possible. And one of the major ways that we've been doing this across the state of Vermont is through proficiency-based instruction, assessment, and reporting practices. So in my work at my school, one of the things I work really hard to do is make our intentions for learning really transparent to students by making sure that they always understand the learning targets, what are they working toward, offering feedback to them on their work that they can put into action right away, that is detailed, that is more than just a number on a page, that is really actionable, and that really focuses on what their assets are, not focusing on where they're falling short, but what are they doing well, and then what are the next steps for growing even further. And we've been really focused in our school, and particularly in my classroom, on the celebration of progress over product and making sure that students understand and value the learning process and not just the final product that comes out of it, and making sure that they're taking advantage along the way. I did put this slideshow, a link to the slideshow in the chat if people want to access it later. There are a number of links included in here to some of the documents that I'm including and referring to here. I also have been working really hard to provide personalized learning experiences for my students and opportunities to take advantage of moving themselves forward in ways that are relevant and meaningful to them. So in my work in the past few years, we've really moved towards self-paced hybrid learning activities so that students can start wherever is appropriate for them. If they're a little bit ahead of the game, we can enrich that learning. And if they're starting at a place that's a little bit maybe further back, that we're meeting them where they are and then helping them to move forward at a pace that's right for them developmentally. I've also really encouraged students to collaborate with me and my teaching partner to design units that are going to be a good opportunity to practice essential skills, but also that are going to meet their interests and get them engaged in the learning process and hopefully encourage them to be lifelong learners. And lastly here, designing projects that are service learning opportunities so that students are really starting to think of themselves as citizens and that they're engaged civically as well and trying to create work that gives back to our community in ways that are meaningful and help students see that they can make a difference. Connected to that, I've also worked really hard to provide an inclusive and justice-centered learning environment for my students, helping them to understand who they are, what their identities are, and also to understand the identities of others, really trying to encourage them to become informed and action-oriented global citizens. And a big part of that is exposing them to multiple perspectives and encouraging them to be open-minded and to be respectful and to have civil discourse that is productive and not so focused on an us versus them mentality. And also to take action in their school and in their community whenever they're recognizing that there are biases or inequities. We know that those things exist. It's really important that when we see them that we respond to them, but it's also really important that beyond the adults in the building that students are empowered to do that as well. And I will echo what Karen was saying about the windows and mirrors that are so valuable in our literature, and the Social Justice Library, which is something that I co-founded, is a resource that offers texts by diverse authors and featuring diverse characters to students, not only in our own school and in our own SU, but to students all over the state, so that everyone can have opportunities to have those windows and mirrors in their classrooms. And kind of the last piece of this, I actively engage in the Vermont Ed community, but as also my own local community here in Orleans and in the Kingdom. So I'm trying to, as often as possible, engage through social media, particularly Twitter. As I'm sure you know, there's a strong Vermont Ed contingency on Twitter, and trying to share resources and support to educators when needed. I go to as many local events as possible to really honor what our students are doing and help people to better understand all the complexities of our education system, which can be really difficult for folks who are not involved in it on a daily basis. And I presented at a lot of local and national conferences, including the Association of Middle-Level Educators, for the past 3 years, to share our best practices, get feedback to improve my own practice, and to really highlight what our students have achieved. Also published a couple of articles over the last couple of years in a journal called the Middle Grades Review. So my intended message, if I was chosen as Vermont Teacher of the Year, I'm just going to read it to you because I feel like that's the best way to communicate it, and then I'll wrap my presentation. We must always keep students and their needs at the center of our work. And the best way to do that is to partner with the students themselves by communicating openly and honestly with our students, honoring their perspectives and identities, and collaborating with them throughout the many aspects of their educational journey. We can provide the best possible support system for students and create an environment where they can feel safe, valued, and proud of their success as learners and as human beings. So I'll say thank you again for your time and this opportunity to go through this process. It's been incredibly meaningful to me. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out at any time. I'd be happy to check in with people even once this process is over, to share things if people are interested in finding out. And again, there are some links embedded in my slideshow if people have time to check those out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kyle. So I'm going to, before I turn it over to Susanna, just for folks who are on the phone, I know we have a number of folks on the phone. I really would appreciate it if you could mute your phone lines out of respect for our presenters, so that they don't have to contend with the distractions. So with that, we'll turn over to Susanna. I believe it's the final presentation, and then we'll have a little bit of time maybe for any brief comments or questions from the board.
Great, thank you. I am Susanna, and I don't have any slides, so you just get me. Let me just flip my screen right here. Excuse me for the bells in the background. My name is Susanna Cowden. I'm a science teacher at Harwood Union High School. And first, I just want to really thank you for the tremendous honor to be here today and the possibility to represent so many teachers I'm in awe of across the state. So thank you. And thank you to Karen and Kyle for all that you're doing for our kids and everything you shared today. I'm like so humbled to be here with you and just so impressed. So thank you. I am here today because I passionately believe in the power of education and the potential of our young people. Our communities are facing countless challenges, from the global pandemic to climate change, and from racial inequity to deep political divisions. Yet the one thing that can inspire us, unify us, and lead us to solutions to even seemingly insurmountable challenges is education. This is our moment. At the end of last year, a colleague asked some of my students to sign a yearbook for me as I transitioned from Randolph Union High School here to Harwood because it's closer to home and a better fit for my family. But I wanted to share two messages that students wrote me. First, one wrote, quote, "Thank you for everything you've done for my advisory and me. I've missed you so much this year. I'm so grateful for your support over the years, but especially over lockdown in 2020. You have no idea how much I love you, and I wish you the best wherever you go." The emotions of the past year are still raw for our young people in our communities. Many are disengaged and disheartened by all they've experienced, yet as teachers, we still love them. It may take time, but it's our job to lead them to find and build up the good in the world and in each other, to bring together kids from diverse backgrounds to build this one society. Car parades, exhaustive hours on Zoom have taught us that sometimes we need to try something totally new to reach our most vulnerable kids, even those for whom the promise of education seems far out of reach. We will never give up on this promise. This is our time to make education work for all of our kids, especially those from groups that have been historically marginalized and for those of whom education has been a struggle. They are the ones who are going to change the world. The second student was a student I didn't know quite as well. He took a class of mine a few years ago. He participated fairly actively, yet he always seemed as if there are other things in which he was more interested in than science. Since then, he's grown into a great leader in our school's climate work. And he wrote me, quote, "Your Planet in Motion class was the spark that lit my interest in the issue of global warming, and I am eternally grateful for it. Good luck next year." This comment stands out to me for multiple reasons. The world's changing rapidly, and as educators, we must prioritize and adapt so our work is relevant for all of our kids. We must fuel the fires of opportunity and open the doors for students to be leaders. We can't shy away from talking about issues like climate change, its local impacts, and the way it's disproportionately impacting our most vulnerable communities. We can't wait for the perfect moment for tough conversations. Instead, we're braver than silence. For the future of our students, we must now step even further into difficult teaching. At the same time, we don't have to do this work alone. The curriculum for the class the student referred to was certainly a work in progress. I constantly questioned and collaborated with colleagues across grade levels, especially the phenomenal educators Faith Hester-Reyes and Vicki Johnson. We grappled with learning activities and how to empower students together. We looked at data to see who was successful and who was struggling and how we could adapt our work to best support them all. There are too many great teachers across Vermont for us all to work in isolation. Our strength comes when we question ourselves and each other and when together we seek solutions. This is our superpower to make more urgent change. None of this is easy, but this is the time to take the positive risks, to try the challenging conversations, to innovate in our curriculum, to invite in and support each and every student again and again and again. Our moment is now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susanna, for a wonderful presentation. Already, we have roughly 5 minutes. And first of all, I want to thank all 3 candidates for, just some wonderful presentations and, just a few observations. Your passion for Vermont students and for education really came through in all 3 presentations. And I just want to commend you all for your dedication to this really important calling in life. And the second thing that I heard, it's really interesting. We have, a science teacher, a librarian / STEM leader, a humanities teacher, different disciplines, but some unifying themes that I heard was really around meeting the individualized needs of students. At the same time, bringing students together in a collaborative manner, for example, project-based learning, et cetera. So, being able to support the individual needs of students, but also fostering environments that promote collaboration is just, I can tell you from my experience in the business world, those are just really important life skills. And I was glad to hear that come through in all of your presentations. So any comments or questions from board members? No. Tom.
Yeah, I want to echo what you said, Oliver. The passion was palpable, and as a practicing educator right now, your concern for the welfare of your students and especially the marginalized, and your concern for equity and providing opportunities for all, that was also very heartening from each one of you. And I just feel very fortunate, and I think our students and their families are fortunate to have teachers like you in the schools doing the work that you're doing at this really, really hard. This is a really hard time. Your gas tanks run empty pretty quickly, balancing all the needs that have come in the last 18 months. So congratulations for being selected to present today, and all three of you did a great job.
Excellent. Patrick, do you want to just provide a brief overview of next steps, where we go from here?
Absolutely. That's what I was just going to raise my hand to do. So you should have been shared with you the document on cognitoform. That's just a really quick chance to rubric for you to give some feedback. I will let the secretary kind of give a timeline for when we would like that feedback. I don't know, or the chair, but relatively quickly. And then what the process will be is the secretary will take into consideration all of the feedback that comes from the State Board of Ed, also take into consideration the feedback that came both from the applications and from the interviews for the final three, and ultimately Secretary French will name the teacher of the year for 2022 within the next couple weeks. The National Teacher of the Year application window runs the month of October, so this is why it was really essential to get it on the September State Board of Education agenda, so that the Vermont Teacher of the Year can then immediately start to apply for the 2022 National Teacher of the Year. And so in quick time, if those rubrics can be turned around and filled out, they shouldn't take too long to do.
Okay, and what's the deadline? When do you need those by?
If we could get them by the end of the week, that would be fantastic.
Okay, not a problem. Kim, my apologies. I think your hand was up. Unfortunately, I don't have your image on my screen. So, and any other board members, feel free to just speak up because I may not see your hand.
I think that I was just also offering tremendous gratitude for all three of you and the inspiring work that you do. I was so appreciative to hear your focus on student empowerment and the relevance in their work and finding that and helping them see it, and your deep commitment to justice and equity. So just thank you for all that you do and all the ways you support students and families and their growth. We would be fortunate to have any one of you representing the state of Vermont in that work. So thank you.
Excellent. And Tammy, I believe you have your hand up.
Certainly, I'm just going to echo what others have said, but first of all, congratulations to all of you for being such excellent teachers and role models and leaders in your communities and all that you do for our students. And also, I just want to recognize, as many of us already have, is how hard it's been to be a teacher the last 18 months, and your energy and everything you've brought to our students at this time is just so appreciated. So congratulations. Thank you for your wonderful presentations, but more importantly, thank you for all you do. You're seen and you're appreciated, and I just want to congratulate you on this incredible milestone and for sharing your experiences and your work with us today.
I would like to echo that, what everyone else has said, quite frankly, that there were days that you thought you were going to school and then you didn't. And then there were days you thought you were going to be on Zoom and you weren't. And there were days that you thought you'd have your whole class there and you didn't. You pivoted daily and you just did it. So thank you for that. If there were heroes out there, you'd be at the top of the list. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're at 10 o'clock, and we, according to our break, according to our schedule, we have a 10-minute break. So I will ask that that we recess for 10 minutes and return at 10:10 sharp. I do like to keep the trains running on time. And at that time, we will pick up the discussion of concerning the Westminster School District and the Windham Northeast Union Elementary School District. So we will see you in at exactly 10:10.
Thanks so much to the board for their time.
Thank you. We have a quorum here, and before we move on to this agenda item, I do want to recognize Mr. Jepson.
Thank you. And we talked about transparency earlier today, and I need to be completely transparent on what we just saw from those three wonderful teachers. One of those teachers, my children and my family have traveled with to California, to Detroit, because we were on robotics teams that Karen McCullough was the coach for. So I'm not sure I'm feeling completely comfortable voting, but I would leave that at the discretion of this wonderful board if you want my input, or if you would think that maybe how I'm feeling, that maybe I might not be completely, well, my kids had a great time, so I'll leave it at that. So,
okay. Wonderful. Well, if you have concerns about your objectivity, I'll leave it in your good judgment as to whether you. But that's one of the reasons we do have a full board, and oftentimes folks individually may feel conflicted on things, and it's totally acceptable to step aside if you feel uncomfortable.
And I think, just so the rest of the board knows, I will do that because I certainly know one of the candidates far better than I know the others. So I want to be fair. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wonderful. Alrighty. I just received a text message from Kim Gleason. She's having difficulties joining the meeting, so I don't know. She's restarting her computer right now. And I apologize to everybody. It seems like the Teams gremlins have come out of the ether and are not being particularly cooperative this morning. So with that, though, I do want to keep things moving along. We do have a quorum, and I think we can move on to agenda item I, which is a discussion of what's going on with the Westminster School District and the Windham Northeast Union Elementary School District. So this, you may recall that we have had discussions with these folks in the past. There were, certain things, steps in the process that we were waiting for these entities to go through. And that brings us to today. So I think probably at this time, I might suggest Donna Russo-Savage, would you feel comfortable just sort of providing a brief update and summary of what we as a board are being asked to do today?
Certainly. Currently up is the Westminster School District and its place within the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union. You, back in April, you issued a conditional order. Well, let me back up just a little bit, especially for the new members. The statutes that govern withdrawal are extremely sparse, and they haven't been used in a number of years. So you are faced with a situation of trying to figure out how to follow that law, where sometimes that law seems to be internally inconsistent or at least extremely confusing. And very often you have no guidance as to either as to the process, and neither do the participants. So you were at a situation in April where Westminster had gone through the process of voting to withdraw from the Union Elementary School District, and it had been approved by the other members of that district, and you were being asked to approve the withdrawal, approve reconstitution of Westminster as a school district, and then also figuring out when that would occur. The statute says that if you reach the decision that you will approve the withdrawal and reconstitution, then the effective date will be on the either the next July 1st or the date that's set out in a financial in the terms of a financial agreement that's reached between the withdrawing town and the remaining towns that are within the Union Elementary School District. This caused a problem because there was no one who has the authority to act on behalf of a town school district before the town school district was reconstituted. So there was a real chicken and egg kind of issue going on. What you did instead to deal with this was in April, you issued a conditional order that allowed the Westminster School District to be reconstituted for the purpose of electing a board whose duty would be to negotiate the terms of the withdrawal. That and you gave them certain deadlines by which they needed to do things. That board could be elected in your conditional order. That board could be elected. That board would then negotiate the terms of the withdrawal. And then the votes would occur by the member districts as had been, the member towns as had been required in the statute. You then said, once that's all occurred, which we expect to have occur really quickly, come back to us in September, let us know if this has all happened. And at that time, if it has, we can finalize the order so that you will have enough time then to prepare a budget, et cetera, and get ready to assume full operations next July in 2022. So that's where you are today. They are coming to you to let you know. They've submitted the written documents that you asked them to submit. Those were sent out to you with the rest of the materials for this meeting, and they are now here to talk to you about what they have been doing, that they have satisfied the conditions that you laid, and then asking you to finalize that conditional order. One thing I will mention is that you will also need, because there will be a new school district, you will need to also assign them to a supervisory union. In this particular case, it's very simple because the town of Westminster is a member of the Union High School for grades 9 through 12. So you just automatically have to assign this district, this new Westminster Town School District, to the same SU, because a town can't be split between two SUs, one SU for its elementary school and one SU for its high school. So those are the two issues that are before you with the Westminster issues.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that summary. Can I ask, do we have a representative of the Westminster School District in the Windham Northeast Union Elementary School District who is prepared to speak to the board? I see.
Certainly.
Jack Breyer, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Speaking for the Westminster School District would be Cheryl Charles, who's on the call, I believe, and I can speak for the Windham Northeast Unified Elementary School District. And between us, I think we can answer any questions you may have. At least I hope so.
Yep. Okay. So Mr. Breyer, I'll let you kick it off and then turn it over to your colleague.
All right. It is our view that we have met the conditions that the State Board of Education gave to us. Obviously, the board members have been elected in Westminster. We have negotiated a settlement for the outstanding financial issue, which was basically transferring the school buildings back to the Westminster School District from the Unified Elementary School. We settled the financial arrangements. Everybody voted the towns voted to confirm all that. The two boards settled on the details, and we believe we've met all of the conditions. I think you will have before you a pair of letters, one from Cheryl outlining the outlining their compliance with your conditional order, and one from me talking about the urgency of getting the Westminster board up and running so they can work out their budget for next year. And we're hoping that you will grant that you'll take conditional off of their approval and allow them to rejoin the SU so that they can participate in what is a process that takes up about a third of each district's budget, so as well as their own individual district budget. So that's mine, and I'd drop it off to Cheryl at this point, with your permission.
Thank you. And Cheryl, just before I turn over to you, Maureen or Suzanne, Kim Gleason is still having difficulties getting back into the meeting. Could one of you reach out to her offline and try to help her sort this out?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I think Jack did an excellent job of summarizing where we are right now. I think I would just reiterate that we are prepared. Westminster has taken responsibility for our schools throughout this entire process. What we've been missing is the authority. And we've gone through all of the steps that the state required. We appreciate your support throughout this process. I actually want to thank Donna for her excellent summary a few moments ago. What we're asking for now is to be fully reinstated so that we can be voting members of the supervisory union at a critical point in time.
Okay.
That's where we are. We're happy to respond to questions.
Excellent. Thank you for that summary of your request. Board members, are there any questions or comments? Mr. Breyer, if you wouldn't mind taking your hand down. Yeah, thank you. Lyle.
So just to be clear, we have the authority to reinstate their voting membership then so that they can be voting members of the supervisory union district. Is that correct?
That is correct. That would happen as part of the assignment process. Donna, you chime in with the specifics?
Yes, I was actually, just one second, I was pulling something up.
It does sound, I'm sorry, Don, it does sound like that's an important part of this request.
Yes, I think that it's a little bit complicated because the Westminster district won't be a fully operational district until next summer, but obviously it has the need to prepare its budget, to work with the SU on the SU's budget, et cetera, for how it's going to affect its own budget on July 1 of 2022. So I believe that the motion that you would vote on to assign them to the SU would include a provision that first of all, that they have the ability to appoint 3 members to the SU, but that for the period between today and July 1, their voting would be confined to those issues that specifically would affect them financially next year. And that's essentially what was included in the letter that Mr. Breyer submitted. And I think that that's a fair way to work it out. They really technically aren't an operational district yet, and so technically wouldn't be there, but it totally makes sense to have them be assigned and have limited voting rights for that purpose.
Would there, just to follow up, Oliver, would there be any concern about equity with the money that is coming from the federal government during this coming year if they don't have if they don't have voting rights? And is that even a concern? Maybe that's a question to the supervisory union.
I can help with that if it's of interest to anyone.
Yeah, Jack, why don't you go take that one?
Yeah, that's actually one of the pieces, and in fact, I refer to it, as did Cheryl, in our separate letters that ESSER fund distribution is really important. These are particularly for ESSER 3, that's going to involve capital expenses that will have long-term impact on the district. And I think as with almost no exception, the SU board, and I hesitate to speak for them without the chair here, felt that it was important for Westminster to have a full voice in those discussions. You may have read in the papers that ESSER funds have been a big item for us in our SU, and we think that they need to have a voice as to where money spent on their district is actually allocated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Donna, I believe you've prepared a draft motion for the board to consider, and I wonder it might be helpful if you could maybe perhaps put it on the screen.
I just forwarded it to Maureen and Suzanne because I don't know how to do that, and I had a feeling that you might be asking for that. So one of them should be able to pull that up. And I think that this probably is simplest if it goes in as two separate motions. One to finalize the withdrawal and reconstitution, and then a second one under 261 to assign them to an SU.
Yep.
So Maureen or Suzanne, did you receive what I just emailed to you?
I did, yes. And I will try and share.
I did, Donna, so I think Suzanne's going to share.
And Cheryl, I'm not sure. I think we're getting some static from your line, so if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, that would be great. Excellent, thank you.
Bear with me.
No worries.
So while we're waiting for that, Oliver Lyle again, I just want to make sure again that Westminster has access to ESSER funding through whatever process we're setting up. And I don't know that it is under our control to do that. Maybe it's the supervisory union's role, but I would certainly love assurances that somehow the ESSER funds will be equally distributed or equitably distributed.
Sounds like the secretary may have a comment.
Yeah, I think to the district's concern, I think it would be important to situate them with some voting rights on the SU board, since the use of those funds comes to the supervisory union, but they're not necessarily distributed on an equitable basis. They're distributed on a priority basis that, the board members need to weigh in on. So it would be important to give them a direct voice in those deliberations.
Okay.
May I just respond to that a little bit as well? The draft. Oops, you'll see the draft, and it's down at the very, very bottom. That would be in response to this is that I think that unless someone disagrees, that the provision that's under 3A, that the 3 appointed members to the SU would have the authority to vote solely on matters as determined by the WNSU chair that affect budgets and budget planning for fiscal year 2023 and after. So by talking about it broadly as budgets and budget planning, I thought that it would encompass anything, including those funds. But, if you need to have more, if anyone needs it, there needs to be more specificity that can be taken care of.
Okay. Jen.
Yeah,
With regard to this, do we have someone from the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union who is like, do we have their accord on this point? I just want to make sure we're all buttoned up.
Yeah, do we have a representative from the supervisory union online?
I nominated our SU chair. I don't know if she's on. That would be Jess West Clark, but I'm also on that board, and I believe that there is near consensus on this point. And one hesitates to speak for a board, but we have had multiple discussions on this point, and there's been what we'll call Quaker meeting consensus. I'm not sure. I'm looking for the resolution. I believe we passed one on multiple occasions, but there's unanimity that we want the Westminster board as participating members, and we have expressed on multiple occasions discomfort with not having them have a seat at the table when discussing ESSER.
Can I just want to ask a very direct question? Is there someone from the supervisory, and I'm well aware, as I'm sure other board members are, which is why I think there's a little concern here, that there are clearly some issues with that supervisory union district. So I want to be very, very clear about the need for someone from the SU who is authorized to speak on behalf of that SU board. And if we don't have that person on the line, I'm going to table this issue until later in the meeting in the hopes that we can get someone on the line who's empowered and authorized to speak on behalf of the board. So if I'm going to ask very directly, is there someone on the line who is authorized to speak on behalf of the district, the SU board?
Let me see if I can raise Jessa West Clark, who is the chair of that board, and it may take a few minutes.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, and I'll come to you here in a moment, Tammy, I'm going to table this discussion, and we're going to pick up our next agenda item and return to this if we can get the appropriate person on the line. Tammy?
One small question or maybe comment is noting that the language in here says that we're referring to budget items for fiscal year 2023. It could be that over the course of the next 9 months with ESSER funds that the district, the SU, is making decisions about allocating ESSER funds just generally over the next few years. And so I want to make sure that we haven't tied anyone's hands by saying fiscal year 2023 only here. If I'm making sense, right? Because funds may be making long-range goals and planning decisions that go beyond fiscal year 2023 that impact this district.
May I? This is Donna.
Yes, Donna, go ahead.
Yes, please. Thank you, Donna.
In the motion regarding the assignment to the SU, actually in 3A, it does say for fiscal year 2023 and after. So I think that that's covered there.
Thank you. I'm reading it on the screen at the same time, so I just want to make sure that I didn't miss
It's
something.
difficult when you have just received this, but
yeah.
But you're absolutely
where I'm
right. That is something that could be an issue, and it's good to be thinking about that.
But we're covered. What you're saying is we're covered?
I believe so. If anyone who represents them doesn't believe it's covered, or if any of you don't believe it's covered, then it should be amended. But I do believe it's covered.
Okay, Cheryl, briefly.
I would make the point right now that ESSER 2 monies are being, plans are made for those as well. That's a $4 million allocation, and about $1.5 million has been has been planned for. So the point would be that some of those monies are being, decisions are made about those monies for the current period of time before 2023. So I hope our hands aren't tied around that aspect.
Okay. If you could put yourself on mute again, you have a lot of background noise online. Artie, unless we have somebody from the supervisory union on the line, I am going to table this item. We'll return to it later in the meeting.
Get on to the call for the state board like now.
Jack, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself. So we will now turn to agenda item J, and we'll at the conclusion of item J, we'll return to item I, assuming we have all relevant parties on the line who can speak to this matter. So with that, we're now on agenda item J, and we're dealing with a rather challenging situation. I don't think it's lost on anyone that we have a challenging situation with the assignment of Ripton to a supervisory union. So for the benefit of all board members, in particular our newest board members and members of the public who are with us, a little bit of background and history, and I'll ask Donna to sort of fill in some of the more detailed gaps. But at a high level, the town of Ripton voted to withdraw from the Addison Central Supervisory District, and that vote was ratified by the other member communities within that district. The state board had asked the Ripton, the newly constituted Ripton School District, to undertake certain activities and report back to the board, which they have done. That is relatively straightforward. The challenge before us is that we as a board now need to assign the newly constituted Ripton School District to a supervisory union, or to declare that the Ripton School District should become its own supervisory district. In other words, performing the functions of a supervisory union and a school district as a single unified district, in the same way that ACSD is a single district. The folks in Ripton have made some outreach to neighboring supervisory unions. My understanding is that they've reached out to the White River Valley Supervisory Union and explored the possibility of becoming assigned with them. They've there may have been some outreach as well to the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union. Those seemed like two potential options for reassignment. The third option is to deconstruct the Addison Central School District, or rather Addison Central Supervisory District, into a school district and a supervisory union, so that there would be a supervisory union, a school district comprised of the member towns of ACSD and Ripton. So two school districts under one SU umbrella. So that's sort of a third option. And then a fourth option is to designate Ripton as a supervisory district. The secretary has been in communication with various parties and has asked for feedback on some of these options, as well as a recommendation that he was leaning towards and has actually presented to the board. Suffice it to say, none of the options are particularly attractive, and the board is cognizant. The board has had discussions about this in prior meetings, that whatever we decide to do as a board, someone or some people will not be happy with our decision. And unfortunately, we find ourselves with certain constraints that we have to work within, and particularly a rather antiquated statutory framework that addresses the withdrawal of districts. You got a little bit of a taste of this with our friends from Westminster. It's even more complicated in this particular case. The state board has brought these issues before the legislature. I see we have a few legislators with us today, and would really encourage the legislature to continue to look at some of these issues, because it places the communities, the state board, and most importantly, our educators and our children in a really challenging spot. So with that said, those are the 4 options. Those are the difficult issues before us. And I would like to hear from each of the parties involved in this to get their perspectives. And then we as a board will have some discussion with some additional information from the secretary and agency staff. So with that, unless there's objection, I think probably a good starting point is to hear from a representative of the ACSD. I'm assuming Peter Burrows, that is you?
That's me.
Okay.
So our board, I shared the position that our board adopted in our meeting on Monday. We had put this on a board meeting in May as well to discuss what the board's position is in terms of what happens to ACSD in this process. We knew that there was a potential that the ACSD could become ACSU, and through conversations both in May and on Monday night, the board affirmed the position statement that we shared with the state board. I think central to the rationale behind wanting to stay ACSD is the significant growth that we've experienced from being a single organization with a single vision, being able to have staff work across our district and move resources around. Our big push for equity, and this year we're starting a strategic plan for equity that's going to span probably 18 months. Being a single district is allowing us to push on equity and look at equity in a different way than when we had separate budgets in a supervisory union and we're constrained in terms of some of that big thinking that we've been able to do. So as we look ahead and look at what being an SU would do to the governance structure, the ACSD board and the ACSD board role statutorily would change. The ACSD board would no longer have the ability to guide solely to guide curriculum, professional development, and kind of the instructional core of the institution. So it becomes much more complex, much more layered, and ultimately we feel like there's an impact for students in that governance change. And so that's I believe why the board has stood behind wanting to stay a single district.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Sir Representative, I believe Mr. Cash from Ripton.
Yep.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, my name's Steve Cash of Ripton. Members of the State Board and Chair, I appreciate the opportunity to come before you and represent the Ripton School District. I'm the chair of the Ripton School Board and have been designated to speak on the board's behalf for this meeting. To start off, I would like to report that Ripton has successfully fulfilled the 3 additional conditions that were required as part of the withdrawal process. First, on June 30th, Molly Witters, Joanna Doria, and I were elected to serve on the newly established Ripton School Board. Second, financial exit agreement was drafted and unanimously agreed on by both the Ripton School Board and the ACSD School Board. Third, on August 31st, 2021, the agreement was ratified by other towns in the ACSD. With those details out of the way, I'd like to discuss the issue of Ripton Supervisory Services. As you all know, Secretary French has put forth his recommendation that Ripton become its own supervisory district. We have heard from school administrators, legal experts in education, and even members of this board who have all indicated that such an outcome seemed very unlikely. We do not believe that a town of our size, currently with 84 K through 12 students, qualifies as appropriately large enough to bear the responsibility of being an SD. We feel that decision would result in our ultimate failure. We believe that the assignment of Ripton to be its own SD is not supported by statute unless you believe Ripton is large enough to support the planning and administrative functions of a supervisory union. There is no example of another supervisory structure in the state even close to our size. The smallest multi-town SU is at least 5 times our size, and the smallest single town district is almost 10 times larger. The reality of finding qualified individuals to perform the task of superintendent, business manager, director of special education services, and human resources is extremely challenging. Layer on that the challenge of filling these as part-time positions, which we would have to do due to our size, would make it impossible. Schools of our size in Vermont in a traditional SU relationship might commit 4 to 5% of their total budget to SU assessments. Were we to operate on our own SD, our budget would increase untenably. We calculated very modest projections for a functioning central office structure, and its budget would occupy at least 15 to 25% of our school's annual budget. Even in a best case scenario, we predict that supporting our own SU would increase our annual budget by at least 20%. This sort of top-heavy budgeting would not be sustainable for a district of our size. We also want to point out the inefficiencies that would be created if Ripton was required to staff all the necessary positions of an SU. Ripton's size means those efficiencies become liabilities. Creation of such a small SD, particularly one based on redundant structures, appears counter to the agenda of Act 46. If the goal of this assignment is efficient spending, we fail to see how Ripton becoming an SD makes sense. We ultimately reject the possibility of being our own SD. We have imagined creative solutions that might allow us to align with other communities in the future. Additionally, we have had multiple productive conversations with both ACSD and White River Valley Supervisory Union regarding our SU assignment. We see sustainable benefits to both relationships. If you'd like to hear more thoughts on those potential arrangements, we are happy to discuss them further. In closing, I would like to ask this board to please hear our sentiments and take them into account in your deliberations and decision. We have come before you because we feel our school is important and we know that it can be an effective part of the future of Vermont's educational landscape. The present situation does not fit neatly into currently available administrative structures. In spite of this truth, we hope that this board can find a way to harness the power of our board, our school, and our community to help validate the relevance of rural communities. We have the passion, energy, and willingness to help our school. We need a structure that allows us to do that. We ask that you do everything in your power to allow us to utilize that energy. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Excellent. Thank you. I'd now like to turn it over to a representative from the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union. Is there somebody on the line?
Yes, Lori Bertrand here. Thank you for your time today, for letting me speak. My name is Lori Bertrand. I'm the current chair of both Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union and the Otter Valley Unified Union School District. My understanding is that everyone already has the original letter that I sent to the board regarding our position on Ripton, and based on that, I want to reiterate the following. Financially, the addition of Ripton to our SU would significantly impact staffing due to the Title I comparable staffing audit. We would need to increase staff in all of our schools to meet this requirement due to Ripton's small class sizes. We would also need to increase staff in our central office to support a third standalone structure of business practices, special education, and curriculum practices to accommodate Ripton. In our first year of merger due to Act 46, our 8 towns saved $1 million. That savings would be undone swiftly with the addition of Ripton. Operations of our SU would also be significantly impacted as our labor contracts would need to be merged. Currently, our RNESU staff are paid less than ACSD staff. The merger of these two contracts would increase our labor costs drastically. We would also have to figure out transportation, and we already have a shortage of drivers. Not to mention that we would be trying to support a new financial structure. Food services, technology, special ed, and a district-wide curriculum would all need to expand to add this one school. Organizationally, we would be impacted as currently all the boards under RNESU are policy governance, which Ripton is not. At the SU level, we have had 27 years of working together to have an equal voice. Adding Ripton as their own district to our SU would give them 1/3, or 3 out of 9 members of that voice, which could significantly impact the district-wide decisions that the SU needs to make. Also, since we're in our 6th year after Act 46 consolidation, we are revisiting our small schools and what we could afford. We could decide to close Ripton immediately without delay, and we have already reconfigured Whiting, Sudbury, and Leicester schools. Ripton could be wrapped into that reconfiguration due to its small size. Educationally, we have district-wide curriculum, special ed, transportation, food services, and technology. Ripton would have to fit into those areas, or there will need to be a side-by-side system, which is neither cost-effective or efficient. So in saying, the RNESU, Otter Valley Unified Union, and Barstow districts do not feel that at this time we are the best option for Ripton, as the impact would be significant on our districts and increased costs across all of our 8 towns, which is not what Act 46 was all about. So thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Lori. Is there someone from White River on the line who can speak to the board?
Good morning, Chair Olson. Thanks for inviting White River Valley Supervisory Union to join the conversation. I'm Superintendent Jamie Canerney. The WRVSU board has met and discussed this and also heard from a representation from Ripton back in June. And I do believe that you've all received the statement that the WRVSU Executive Board put forward to Secretary French and the Ripton Board, and certainly on behalf of them speaking to the State Board. Do you all have that, Chair Olson?
Yes.
So just to highlight a few things about why that statement came to be is that it's important for the State Board to remember that the White River Valley Supervisory Union is really on its infancy stages of being the Owens-Windsor Supervisory Union, which also merged with Windsor North West Supervisory Union. So we are still currently undergoing kind of the remaking of a new supervisory union. And this is, of course, my 2nd year as tenure of the superintendent of schools, replacing Superintendent Bruce Labs. So we are a pretty new formed entity there, as well as the fact that we went through mergers and consolidation at both Granville-Hancock Unified District, Rochester-Stockbridge Unified District, the White River Unified District, and the First Branch Unified District. So we have 4 districts who also are in their infancy of their mergers. We also are a very expansive supervisory union geographically. We encompass 4 different counties. And we have 6 districts already within our supervisory union. And so I have 7 boards that my supervisory union staff serves and supports on a monthly basis. It's also important when you think about geography to know that the White River Valley Supervisory Union does have centralized technology services, of course, special services, food services, and transportation that we are managing from the supervisory union offices in South Royalton. And so certainly we want to share our sentiments and appreciation for the idea of Ripton being a district within a supervisory union. We've had really positive conversations, but we do not feel that it's at the best interest of the students of the White River Valley Supervisory Union or the students of Ripton for WRVSU to take on an additional district at this time.
Okay. Thank you. So in the interest of trying to narrow the focus of our discussion here, Mr. Cash, I want to turn back to you and ask you, a fairly direct question. I heard in your presentation reference to exploring options involving ACSD and the White River Valley Supervisory Union. I did not hear any mention of the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union. So should we interpret that as a suggestion that you are not interested and don't feel that the the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union is an appropriate partner for consideration? If so, I think we can sort of dismiss those folks and narrow our conversation.
Yes, Chair Olson, I would say that is accurate. One of our Ripton board members met with Rutland Northeast pretty early on, and those conversations didn't mature to the level that other options did. So yeah, I think that would be fair to kind of dismiss that option as part of this process currently.
Okay. My colleagues in the State Board of Ed, does anybody have any comments or questions on that, and specifically sort of dismissing that as an option from consideration? Any objections?
We're dismissing both, Oliver?
No, at this point, just Rutland Northeast. It sounds like all parties are in agreement that's not an appropriate match. I'm not hearing any objections. So I think for purposes of moving the deliberations forward, we can remove the Rutland Northeast SU from consideration, and we can narrow our focus. So we're really essentially, looking at now 3 options: assignment to White River, deconstruction of the ACSD, and assignment or designation of Ripton Supervisory, Ripton School District into its own SD. So with that, Mr. French, I'm going to ask that you briefly address the recommendation that you've made, and we'll open it up to some questions and discussions by the board.
Yeah, good morning. You've covered quite a bit of the territory on this, but just a little more context. Earlier this summer, I offered to produce a recommendation to help support the board's deliberations, and that's essentially what you have in the packet is the result of that offer. So you have some analysis from me on the options, plus the reactions to my preliminary conclusion of designating Ripton from the regional stakeholders. So I would agree with what you've heard so far. There's no obvious solution or necessarily good ones. I think another variable I would add, which is mentioned somewhat briefly in my analysis, is the idea that there's still, I think, some regional instability in Addison County. And there's some other activity going on in some of the smaller districts considering similar withdrawal votes and so forth. I believe Lincoln's taken a similar vote. So I would just point out that although you're looking at and required to ultimately designate this district as a member of a supervisory union, this might not be, the region might not be fully settled in terms of ultimately how it would be configured. So that also factored into my thinking. But I ultimately concluded that I was, certainly in relative to the policy goals of the state, but also informed by my practical experience and understanding of where each of the other organizations are, White River and Addison Central, in terms of their organizational trajectory, I was unwilling as secretary to recommend anything that would ultimately disrupt either of those organizations. So as complex as this is, that's kind of where I landed ultimately. I would agree, Ripton is not of the size that we typically would like to see in terms of supervisory union. I think it would be difficult for them to sustain that. But again, I think there's some regional instability still that might result in some opportunities in the future. And also, certainly, I know that the district is looking at contracting for some services over others, and there might be some room there to work something out as well. So, and ultimately, that's kind of how I landed on feeling more strongly that I was unwilling to recommend a disruption of the other two organizations that have made considerable progress in their organizational effectiveness.
Okay. At this time, I'm going to ask both Peter Burrows and Steve Cash to talk a little bit about a sort of a late-breaking suggestion. We'll file this under the heading of sort of creative, solutions. And one was that if the state board was to designate Ripton as its own supervisory district, that we might consider sort of postponing that designation, or the enactment, I should say, of that designation, the effective date, out to some later point in time, and that in effect, the operation of the Ripton Supervisory District, and specifically the operation of the school there, would be postponed. And in the interim, the ACSD, as it's currently constituted, with Ripton having representation on that board, would continue to operate the elementary school. And the thinking is that this would provide Ripton with time to plan, to analyze, and think about how it would move forward as a supervisory district. To Secretary French's point, there's some instability in the region. It might provide some opportunity for that to settle down, and perhaps might provide some time for introspection amongst members of the larger community within the ACSD and Ripton to think about perhaps reconsidering this as a general direction. So at this point, that's my understanding and sort of how I'm viewing this, and I would love to hear some comments from Mr. Burrows and Mr. Cash. So I think Mr. Cash, maybe we'll alternate. We'll start with you and then turn it back over to Mr. Burrows.
Yeah. So myself and another board member of the Ripton School District had a conversation with Mr. Burrows previously about this potential, and what we discussed would be moving the date that Ripton became responsible for the education of the children in the Ripton School District from 2022 to 2023. To be clear, in that time frame, the Ripton School, it was our understanding in that discussion, maybe not outright, but kind of an assumed understanding that the Ripton School would stay open in that time as it is currently. So that was most of the conversation we had, and it was something we both agreed we could be interested in exploring. From our vantage in Ripton, there certainly would be some benefits to that situation and to pushing the timeline out. There still is a tremendous amount of inherent risk in that situation because it just depends on other situations in Addison County. So we could still be faced with our own school district. It would just be at a later time frame.
Okay. Mr. Burrows.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what Steve shared. We did talk about this last week, and as we kind of looked at what Ripton would have to do, based on the Secretary French's recommendation to be ready by 22. I think we all collectively realized that was going to be a big lift, and it's something that I also talked about with our board on Monday night, and there was broad support for continuing to have Ripton within ACSD for an additional year or for whatever time the board decides is helpful as these decisions are made.
Okay. So I'm going to sort of reframe the three options and then open it up for discussion amongst the board. So where I think we're at now is the three options are: one, option one would be to assign the Ripton School District to the White River Valley Supervisory Union for purposes of supervisory union services. Option two would be to deconstruct the ACSD into a supervisory union with 2 member school districts, including Ripton and the former ACSD. And option three, now sort of modified, is this idea that Ripton would be designated as its own supervisory district, but that the implementation of that would be delayed and that ACSD would continue to provide education for the students. So those are sort of the three options. And at this time, I'm going to open it up for discussion and deliberation amongst the board. Jen.
Okay.
Jen, I don't know if we can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Thanks. I have 3 questions, and I guess my first question is for Superintendent Burrows. There was some indication about the possibility of the ACSD providing supervisory services, and I don't know enough about that. Like, could Ripton become its own supervisory district and then contract for services with the ACSD without turning the ACSD into an ACSU? Is that possible?
It's a good question. It's something that the 3 of us, when we met, me and the 2 representatives from the Ripton board, talked about. My understanding, and others on this call may have broader understanding, my understanding was that that wouldn't be an option, just given the construct in statute of an SD versus an SU. I believe there are some positions that can be contracted, but in terms of Ripton continuing to operate status quo, but not being part of ACSD, I'm not sure that's possible.
Okay. And then my next question is for Steve Cash. Do you feel like you have exhausted your possibilities of looking for any supervisory union within the state of Vermont who might be willing to take you?
I mean, that's a pretty broad question. As far as any supervisory union in the state, I would have to answer no. But anything that's geographically reasonable and seems feasible, just kind of based on a map, I would have to answer that yes, we have.
So, I mean, I know that, no one here probably loves any of these 3 options, but if these are the only 3 options, are you comfortable with this universe of 3 options and not feel tempted to explore whether there's a 4th one that just hasn't been uncovered yet?
I think, as some of what Peter mentioned, the feasibility of an SD and what some of the potentials are there, we would certainly be interested in exploring that. And as was alluded to earlier, there may also be some supervisory structures with other schools in the area in time. So, yeah, I mean, I think in a general sense, the options we have on the table appear to make the most sense for this situation.
Okay. And then my third question is, your withdrawal agreement contemplates a July 1st, 2022 effective date. So I'm just wondering, if we push this out for a year, does that mean that you need to re-execute the withdrawal agreement and, you know, have it reapproved by all of the voters in all of the different towns?
I unfortunately don't have a definitive answer to your question. That is something, as these conversations developed, you know, we've kind of been going back and thinking about some of the repercussions and what would need to be re-navigated. I don't know if the withdrawal agreement needs to get navigated. I don't know if, as far as the State Board of Education's withdrawal process, what mechanisms exist in that would have to get adjusted and the ability to adjust those. So I think those are open questions at this point.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. So Jen, on your first legal question, I'm going to ask Donna to I want to cue Donna up, not to answer it now, but Donna, if you could just be prepared to address that question around an SD contracting for services. We'll return to that because I think it was an important question. So we have several board members looking to speak. I'm going to recognize Tammy Kolbe first, and then Tom Lovett and Jenna O'Farrell. So Tammy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And my question follows on Jennifer's question. One of my questions was, again, the withdrawal agreement. But to that point, I'm wondering, and this question is for Steve and Peter, has there been some discussion about when this sort of fourth arrangement would sunset? Like, how much time are we talking about? Are we talking about a year? Are you talking about 2 years? Are you talking about putting a sunset in there at all and just leaving this open-ended? I'm just curious, sort of what does this process look like time-wise with respect to your discussions?
I'm happy to take it, or do you want to go?
Peter, take it away, and then Steve.
Okay. You can add on if.
Okay. I think when we were talking about it, I think we were thinking of another year, and I think some of that was predicated on the fact that Lincoln had a successful vote recently, and I think that vote is coming to the other 4 towns soon. Addison was also, I think they're working towards a revote as well. That went down, but was very close. So I think in our conversation, we were thinking that the activity that Secretary French mentioned, most of that probably is within the next year or so, and that looking at 23 was a more realistic target.
Steve, do you agree with that? Timeline?
Steve, you're frozen and you're on mute. Steve, I may suggest you might want to just turn your video off. I think you have a bandwidth issue on your end.
And then my follow-on question would be that, you know, what steps does Ripton intend to take in that process to make sure that that timeline is hit, right? So we're talking about extending this, sort of continuing on where we are now in many ways. But what's going to be different, and what steps are going to, like, what steps are you envisioning taking that you haven't taken already, or is this just a wait and see to see what happens with other districts and other district configurations?
I believe that question, we are having serious internet issues.
Yes. I could tell, Steve, I'd turn off your video. I don't know if we lost Steve completely, or are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you all.
Okay, perfect. You're much better now. So yeah, leave your video off. I think you'll be in a better place.
All right. Yeah, I believe I heard enough of the question to respond, and my apologies if I missed the question in and out. But I think for Ripton, this is primarily a wait and see situation, and we'd have to see how the rest of the landscape evolves and if there are some additional opportunities as far as our assignment to an SD. So I think it's mostly a wait and see situation at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Tammy, any other questions? Okay. So Tom Lovett, Jenna O'Farrell, Kim Gleason, and then also Lori from RNS EU. You have your hand up as well. So Tom, the floor is yours.
Yeah, my questions have been asked and answered by Jennifer and Tammy.
Okay, thank you. Jenna.
Hi. Maybe my question could be a little naive, but I'm wondering during this process of option 4, for Ripton to wait and see what other folks are doing. Is there any room for Ripton to have some internal process to assess kind of your reasons for withdrawal to begin with? I'm reading the statement from the September 8th memo. It said Ripton would have happily remained an active member of the district if it were not for the town's disenfranchisement and the process of consolidation, which negatively impacted our youngest students. So is there room to have more processes and internal conversation?
Steve,
I guess that question would be for Steve, Molly, and Joanna.
Well, we only have one person speaking for each entity, so Steve is the designated person. Steve, you're on mute.
I think would be. Oh.
You're unmuted. We can't hear you.
Teams issues as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Can you hear from this computer, y'all?
Yes. Yes.
Steve, we're going to give you this computer.
Yeah, that would.
All right. All right. So you can hear me?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
If you could repeat the question, that would be greatly appreciated.
So the question was, during the process of exploring possibilities of an option 4, you're waiting to see what other districts are doing in the meantime, is there any room for Ripton to consider the reasons why they felt like the town's disenfranchisement and the process of consolidation negatively impacted their youngest students? And is there other options besides withdrawal?
Yeah, and I think as we move ahead in this process, as Oliver alluded to in some of the opening comments, I think we could see some situations where we could have conversations with ACSD to have further discussions about our situation. Our school is extremely important to our town, and we also believe it can be a functional piece of the educational landscape opening. So within those parameters, I think there is some discussion that could be had. I would probably pose the question to ACSD whether they were interested in reconsidering some of their positions. And I don't know, and I don't expect an answer in this meeting, but that would be a part of that discussion for us. And my apologies for our poor technology.
No worries. We live in Vermont. These things happen. Kim.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions, and the first maybe to Peter, I'm not sure, but the timeline that was anticipated otherwise for the closure of Ripton and the impact on the ACSD for a delay, if it were to have been in the next year or so, And what might this mean for precedent in decisions of unified districts regarding closures and mergers of schools? And I have a second question for Steve.
So the board was engaged in a 3-year-long facilities master planning process, and that's where this work came out of that. That's why we're here today. The board stopped that process, paused that process in February when they just realized that the challenges of the pandemic and moving this work forward were too difficult. The board took it back up at their retreat recently and are currently kind of putting the question of consolidation on pause for a while to wait for the outcome of the weighting study and Act 173 and other changes to the financial funding system in Vermont, which seems like, if you read all the tea leaves, it looks like there are going to be some pretty significant changes in the next couple of years. So the board decided that they're going to finish the master planning process with the other components they're looking at. They're looking at secondary school bonding. They're going to take up school choice, looking at sustainability, some of those kinds of things. So it is now currently not being taken up. So there was never a timeline that was set either previously or recently.
Thank you. That's helpful to understand. And then my question, I think, for Steve, would you imagine that the community might reconsider the decision in the context of the facts in terms of, the lack of willingness to reconstitute SUs to accommodate this change, and maybe the full information about the implications for students, families, and taxpayers?
Yeah, I can share some of my thoughts and sentiments on that. But certainly having the SU and SD assignment on the table and that as a possibility, we had understood that was a possibility, but a very, very unlikely one. So I do think there could be some reconsideration. At the same time, there's a counterbalance to that our town really values our school and the role it plays. So I think there's kind of both of those issues that I don't want to forecast or speculate exactly where that balance would come out, but those conversations certainly could be had.
And I guess I'm assuming then that full context of these facts and information was not available at the time that voters were asked to make a decision of this nature.
I think it was available, but everyone thought the SD and SU situation had the potential that it seems to in this conversation. So I think the options were available, but the weight that was given to each option has shifted. And I think it has shifted very recently with Secretary French's recommendation, as I indicated in my piece, that the other SUs and SDs in the state are generally much, much larger than the Ripton School District SD would be.
I guess in hearing from the other superintendents and board chairs, it strikes me that there was not necessarily an affirmative option that resolved the problem you're describing, that by your decision to separate, having created a smaller district, it seems a little bit circular. That creates a problem where the size doesn't lend itself to its own superintendency and centralized services. So anyway, I'm just, I guess, commenting on the realities of the situation and the implications for education, not just a school building. So, thank you.
Great, thank Lori from Rutland Northeast, you had your hand up earlier. Did you have something to say?
No, I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Lyle, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Just remind me, and it can be anyone can remind me, but if we stayed with the current configuration for an additional year, would that fourth plan be that there would be no reconfiguration of the grade levels? Because I seem to recall the conversation was around reconfiguration of grade levels that was a concern to Ripton. So would this fourth proposal leave things as is for an additional full year while they continue to look into what will be for 2023?
Yeah, Lyle, so as far as the reconfiguration, the pre-K and sixth grade have already gone down the hill, as we say in Ripton, to Middlebury currently. So that reconfiguration has already taken place. As part of our kind of potential reconsideration discussions, if they occur, we would maybe have interest in a discussion about pre-K migrating back up the hill, but that's kind of a separate thing. But the direct answer is that reconfiguration has taken place.
Thank you.
So in the interest of narrowing our focus, my sense of, based on the questions from my colleagues here on the board, et cetera, there's really been no discussion of or questions around White River. So I'm going to posit that there is no support on the board to pursue that option. So I'm looking for any board members to object. Otherwise, I'm going to suggest that we take the White River SU assignment off the table and further narrow this conversation along the lines of the discussion that we're having. Does anybody object to that? Jen?
Can I just, or can we hear from Steve as to whether he agrees that, he thinks that.
Yeah. Steve, any response to that?
Yeah, my response to that is I think myself and the fellow board members were hopeful we could get to a place. We really appreciate the way the White River Valley Supervisory Union operates, and it's a forward-thinking model, we believe. They cover a lot of territory. We also recognize, I think as Jamie said, their infancy in the process, and we certainly would not want to burden them if they felt that it was something they could not support. So yes, we would support taking that option off the table as well.
Okay, thank you. So I think effectively board members and interested parties, members of the public, we're really down to effectively two options, the way I think I see this. And so option one now is the deconstructing ACSD into its own SU with 2 member school districts. And the second option is to designate Ripton as a supervisory district, but to postpone the enactment or effective date of that with ACSD continuing to operate and provide for the education of Ripton students for some period of time. I think current assumption is at least another year. Those are sort of the options that I think we're sort of have narrowed this down to. And I have a hand up from Kim. Floor is yours.
I just wanted to double check that there's not another option to table the decision, since there'll be no, in case there's reconsideration in that year. It strikes me that the decision to designate but have it be effective later is going to have no impact in the next year, right? And
only that it would focus the conversation, because it provides some, I think it's important that everybody understands that, what the final outcome is going to be. And if that prompts some discussion, it prompts discussion. Jen.
Okay, I was wanting to ensure just that. I think, Oliver, that by making that designation now, we aren't making it harder for their reconsideration. And if we were to table our decision, does that leave more open for their reconsideration? Do we make, and maybe Donna would know if we put extra steps in there. I don't know.
Let me just suggest, I think it is very clear that we are not in a position today to take a formal action. I think where I see us landing today is something a bit more informal that we would ratify, because we're going to need language that, you know, as amazing as Donna is, I don't think she's prepared to, and it wouldn't be prudent for her to operate on the fly here. But at least what I do want to do is that we provide a clear roadmap to everybody who's involved so they know what to expect. And that in the meantime, you know, we can provide Donna with some direction. We can get the language and then, you know, put this to bed at our next meeting. But I do think it's important that we arrive at a decision that's very clear about where this is going. And my hope is that that will prompt some discussions in the meantime. Jen.
So, yeah, I think I don't feel like I am prepared to make a decision on this and would suggest that, you know, we push this out by at least a month. But I think it would be helpful, at least for me, if we had answers that Donna could prepare, you know, first to whether a supervisory district can contract with another supervisory district for supervisory services. That's kind of an unanswered question in my mind. And then the second thing is really, what authority do we have, or what steps would need to be taken to push out the effective date by a year? Because again, we have a, you know, signed and ratified withdrawal agreement that contemplates a July 1st, 2022 effective date. And the motion that was moved and adopted at our May meeting contemplated a July 1st, 2022 effective date, assuming that 5 conditions were met, and, you know, all 5 of those conditions have been met. So I just want to make sure that if we push this out by a month, or I'm sorry, by a year, that we either undo anything that needs to be undone, or in any rate, make sure that we're on solid footing to be able to do this. I agree that it makes sense to make a pause. I just want to make sure that we can actually do that.
Donna, did you want to address some of the legal questions?
Sure. First of all, it is very clear in statute. It's not explicitly stated in this way, but it's very clear from the statutes in Title 16 that a school district must either be assigned as a member to an SU, or it must act as its own SU, which is called a supervisory district or an SD. So there isn't some other way of obtaining or existing, I guess. You can't exist outside of an SU unless you are a supervisory district, a single district SU. So that's the first thing. 16 VSA 267 is titled Joint Agreements Among Supervisory Unions. And as one part of that statute, there is a statement that a supervisory union can enter into contracts to provide services to other supervisory unions or to districts. So there is the way to provide, or for example, for a supervisory district such as a small single town school district that is its own supervisory district, to contract for certain services, and that would be under Section 267. However, there isn't anything in statute that we were able to find that would allow it to contract away its supervisory districtness. It would even if many of these services are provided for it, it still is a supervisory district and has those responsibilities and is the LEA for whatever purposes it is the LEA for its students. So it would still have the responsibilities, but it would be able to pay for some of those services to be provided by another supervisory union if the supervisory union was, willing to enter into a contract to provide those services. I mean, it's not something that they can just demand. It would be a two-way street because it would need to be a contract for that. So I think that hopefully kind of answers the first part of the question. I do believe that if you were to designate the Ripton School District as its own supervisory district, it could contract for services if another SU was willing to provide those services. But it would still be a supervisory district and have those responsibilities, those legal responsibilities. The second part of the questions I think that you were asking is if you were to follow this fourth option and push things off, indicate that you are going to designate it as its own SD, and then push everything off by a year so that Ripton, the students in Ripton would still be students of the ACSD for another year until 2023. Do you have the authority to do that? So, and I wrote down the process of my thinking in this, so I apologize if it does sound a little bit like I'm reading it, but I wanted to make sure that I got it in kind of a logical order. Section 724C directs that the effective date that you impose is either the next July 1st or it's the date identified in the financial agreement that's approved by the voters of the other towns. And both of those then, because that financial agreement has been appointed and has been approved, and that financial agreement says July 1 of 2022, which is also the next July 1, both of those things point to an effective date of July 1, 2022 for withdrawal and full reconstitution and responsibility for operation, and necessarily either assignment to an SU or designation as its own SU. But as you've experienced throughout this matter, 724 provides very little guidance and almost no process, and you've had to find creative ways to deal with this all along. And 724 doesn't even contemplate any issues arising other than the need for a financial agreement of withdrawal. So until the legislature acts, you're really in that same awkward situation of trying to find ways to address issues where there really isn't anything, and where you are given a directive that it should be either July 1st or the date identified in the financial agreement, but you have this other unanticipated issue that's arisen that is fully within your authority. I mean, you have full authority to make these decisions about SU placement. That has nothing to do with withdrawal or Act 46 or anything. It is in statute that you have the ability to do this. So all of that, it seems reasonable that because there aren't other issues contemplated in 724, and this is an issue, it's a real issue, it's an issue within your authority under 261 to draw SU boundaries or designate supervisory districts. I think that especially if Ripton has asked you and seems to be asking you if this is the way you go to postpone the effective date, and if the Addison Central School District Supervisory District either joins in that request or acquiesces to that request, I think that it seems reasonable that you would be allowed to postpone a date. Okay. That's a really long way of getting to it. I'm sorry, but there isn't a clear answer, and so it kind of required going through these thoughts. And then just really quickly, finally, I agree about the the voter approved financial agreement. It will be up for the parties' attorneys to make this decision. My guess is that it might need to be voted on again, and perhaps with no changes other than those dates. But it doesn't seem as though you can have that agreement sitting out there and just ignore it, a voter approved agreement, and ignore it. It seems as though at some point in the process, maybe at town meeting day, it could just be, or during that time period, that it could just be added to one of the things that the school district voters vote on.
Okay, thank you, Donna. So I'd like to ask some sort of follow-up questions. I think most of the board members have had the opportunity to ask questions, and I want to do a little bit of follow-up on some of what I heard. And first of all, I do apologize. We clearly have run over time, and we're going to have to sort of defer some other items on the agenda. But this is a really important discussion, and I think a really very productive conversation. So I appreciate everybody's patience as we go through this. It's important that we get this right. So, I want to pick up a little bit, pick up on a couple of strands that I've heard in some of the questions and comments. And, I want to return to, a line of questioning that Jenna O'Farrell asked about and pick up on a little bit of a strand that I think I heard from Peter Burrows around, sort of the facility master planning and where that's at. And Mike, picking up on Jenna's earlier line of questioning, if I heard, Peter, if I heard you correctly, well, first of all, is the chair of the ACSD on the line as well with us?
She is.
Yes,
yeah.
I am.
Okay, thank you. If I heard you correctly, it sounds like given all that's happening between, the pandemic, Act 173, ESSER funding, et cetera, that your intention is to sort of put a lot of these discussions that clearly precipitated Ripton's actions on hold for at least a few years. And did I hear that correctly, Peter?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought you were talking to Mary.
Yeah. Okay. My question is, I think everybody now has a full appreciation for the challenges and the complexities that we're dealing with here. And my question is, is there room for the Ripton and ACSD to sort of reverse course here and go back to being a single unified district and to engage in some conversations over the next couple of years around some of the concerns that Ripton has. And I believe that if I recall from earlier conversations, there were concerns about representation on the board, et cetera. And I really want to try to encourage everybody involved to find a way forward that keeps this unified governance structure in place. And it feels to me like there's room with this timeline of at least a few years to do that. And I would really like to see more productive conversation within that environment rather than continuing to go down this really painful path that we're on right now. So Mike, that's a very direct question that I'd like to pose to the chair of the ACSD since she's on the line, and to you, Mr. Cashman.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity and also the difficult nature of this discussion and situation. I think the board has, without question, tried to and will continue to do what's best for all students. And we're trying to work through very difficult decisions. Because of the current unsettled nature of many of the financial constraints and responsibilities of our district, we have decided to put a pause on the very serious topic of consolidation of schools without more stable ground. That being said, we also recognize that when that ground does become more stabilized and understood, we will still be facing very significant financial challenges. And so it is not so much that we believe our work is going to get easier. We just believe that we need to have a better understanding of that work before we move forward. And so I think that's where we are right now. But again, we do take very seriously our responsibility to ensure an equitable solution for all students. And that is the work that we want to continue. And so while we're in a very difficult position right now, and I believe the option that you all have crafted with regards to putting a time frame on this discussion, getting a better understanding of what the lay of the land is going to look like given the unrest in the region, is prudent without question, and I feel the full board supports that. But I also believe that our community, the thought of our community going back to an SU, if they understood that was truly a possibility, would have given them significant pause and consideration in how they place their votes on this issue in general.
Yeah. And I think you hear in my voice, and I'm sure my colleagues will have differing, there may be a range of views, but I'm sure you can hear from my comments some real reservations and concern about the prospect of deconstructing the work that's been done. Very concerned about that. And I'm trying to do everything I can to encourage folks to try to make this work. So with that, Mr. Cash. Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
all right. Yep. If there's difficulty hearing me, let me know. I'll turn my video back off.
Yeah, turn the video off.
I think it's helpful to have it on. All right, understood. Yeah, I really appreciate kind of this line of questioning. I think it's a productive approach to this situation. I would respond in the affirmative. I do believe there is room in this situation for dialogue. I will say I do think, Addison Central School District may need to evaluate whether they would like to make some room in the conversation or not. And I would like to point out to the board that Ripton started kind of this whole journey on withdrawal. We took a petition to the school board to try and get our articles of agreement changed so that a town would have a vote on the closure of our school district. At that point, the school board chose to not even bring that petition for a vote. It was just dismissed. And if my memory serves me correctly, there was 800 signatures in that petition. And that was really challenging. So I think if we can get away from that approach to addressing small towns, I think there is some room to work on this. One kind of thing that is when...
sorry to interrupt, Steve. There's somebody with a phone number ending in 87. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, please. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. I did also want to point out when Peter first started talking about all the growth that has taken place in Addison Central School District due to the district not having to navigate supervisory union services and the challenges that come with it. He indicated there'd been a fair amount of growth and it was kind of a positive situation. It differs from some of how the situation is portrayed in board meetings, and that, things are not going so well, and that we need to constantly kind of be looking in the financial direction, making sure things are headed in the right direction. So I just want to point out that kind of dissonance that exists, because it's hard on the ground to know exactly what to make of that. When on an administrative level, it appears one way, but then on a board level, it appears it's a different situation. So.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna put on the table for my board colleagues to consider a path forward here, and would appreciate some comments from my board colleagues as well as from Ripton and ACSD. And my proposition is this: it is that we as the state board express our intent to designate Ripton as a supervisory district with all of the obligations and responsibilities that go with it, but that we not take any formal action on that designation. We just simply express that as an intent, and further that we encourage Ripton and ACSD to come together over some period of time. I would suggest over the next few months, with the idea or with the direction to find a way to bring Ripton back into the ACSD as a full member of ACSD, and with the intention of keeping ACSD whole as a supervisory district, including Ripton. And that the parties report back to the board at some later time, I would suggest November or December, with progress on those discussions. And if those discussions do not appear to be fruitful, we as a board would then have further conversations pertaining to the effective date of Ripton becoming its own supervisory district. So in broad strokes, that's the proposition I'd like to put on the table. I'd like to get some feedback, reaction from my board colleagues, and then also some input from ACSD and Ripton. Lyle.
I would concur with that. I've had concerns about a very small district being able to do what Ripton wants to do. I understand their passion, but it seems like there's a middle ground here that could be developed. Geography stipulates, I think, that it is just down the hill. And I would love to think that somehow that you could get together and sing Kumbaya and make this work for both. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kim, then Jen, then Tom.
And make it work for all students, I think, Lyle, I would add to that. But I was just wanting to clarify, Oliver, in this inaction or whatever we're going to take that's a consensus conversation, are we saying at a date in the future we are going to consider this? It may or may not be October meeting, it might be November meeting, but we are telegraphing the decision as the Secretary's recommendation might have. But in this case, we're telegraphing what we are hearing, what we are likely to do, and we are not setting a time certain at which we're going to do that. But that if nothing else evolves, be warned, this is what the action that the state board is going to take.
That's, I think you've heard it correctly. Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Jen, and then Tom.
Well, and I would say that this, I mean, I wouldn't say that what we're forecasting is an absolute certainty, because by the very nature of this forecast, we're giving the parties time to be creative and come back to us with what might be ultimately a better resolution of this issue. So, but short of that, I think it's fair to say that we're leaning in the direction of making Ripton its own supervisory district. And then the one other thing, I would put it back to, Ripton and the ACSD as to whether they think a November, December reporting back is a good time frame for an initial reporting, or more time, less time. I would just be curious to hear from the parties on that.
Okay. And I'll give the parties an opportunity to respond. I just want to be really clear, Jen, make sure that you're on the same page, and same for my other colleagues. the preferred outcome is that ACSD, that Ripton folds back into ACSD as a full member of ACSD. I really do not like the idea of some weird off the books arrangement. And I want to be clear that that's not the intent here.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Tom.
Yeah, that was going to be my question first, Oliver. In your language, I think you directed them to find a way to fold Ripton back into ACSD as the preferred outcome, which would mean undoing the withdrawal and going through that process. And I think that makes sense given the history of or the genesis of the desire to withdraw, and I wonder what will happen if the landscape continues to be unstable. There might be new situations that come up. So those are also something they should discuss. But I agree that given the genesis of the withdrawal, your proposal makes sense.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to hear from ACSD first, and then Ripton as to whether this approach is you feel is fair and workable as a way forward.
Mary, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
Go ahead, Peter. I can follow up.
I think first, I think the timeline is reasonable. Giving us 2 or 3 months to engage in this conversation and continue to look at some of the challenges we're facing as a district and look at what it could look like going forward. So I think that timeline is helpful. And I think the extension of time too that we're talking about is also helpful. The 23 date is also helpful, just to make sure that if those conversations don't come to a productive place, that there's time for Ripton to work with others potentially as that landscape changes.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else from ACS? Mary, anything from you to add on to that?
No, I'm fine, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
Yeah, I think from Ripton's perspective, we think this approach is fair, and we can agree to attempt this preferred outcome. The November and December reporting timeline is workable for us, and also the kind of 23 backstop is acceptable to us as well. Is also acceptable. I do have a few questions, and these, I think could just get added to the list of ongoing questions. But for us in Ripton, we would want some clarification of our function as a legal board currently. And then I imagine this is also on Peter's mind, but also getting an understanding of budgeting for next year and what that would look like. And then if we could just clarify if the State Board of Ed can rule not to approve our withdrawal, or would there have to be another vote in that situation?
Okay. All very good questions. And so let me just suggest that I think some of these questions will be answered with the very capable assistance of the legal team at AOE over the coming months. So I don't probably not prudent to try to address all of them here and now. As I indicated, I think the best course of action is to not take any formal, is for the board not to take any formal action today, but just sort of informally, I'd like to get and I appreciate both parties' willingness to try to find a way to make all of this work and get to the preferred outcome. And I want to make sure you have, sufficient time to do that. So I think I heard November and December timeframe is reasonable. So why don't we target the state board's meeting in November for an update at least, and that hopefully gives you some time. If it turns out that you need more time, you can provide a status update in November, and we can take the issue up in our December meeting if additional time is needed. I really want to make sure we give you guys space to find a good path forward that provides a great outcome for the kids in your community. That's the most important thing, and that we don't rush into a situation that's untenable. And then I would suggest, at that sort of November meeting, we would, the board would be, positioned with appropriate language to take any formal action that needs to be taken. So that's sort of my suggestion right now. I see Donna Russo-Savage has her hand up, so she may have some advice on specific things we need to do in the meantime. Donna?
Yes, I have just two thoughts. One is that it might be helpful for you to ask for at least some sort of a date by which some sort of written heads up would come in prior to the November meeting, just so that we'd have an idea of the direction that you all might be heading into, and then I might be needing to prepare draft motions for.
Yes, yeah, that's a great suggestion. So I would suggest, let me pull up my calendar here. With November, would November close of business November 5th be acceptable? I'm seeing Peter nod his head. And Steve, that's a yes?
Yep.
Okay.
And then if I may, there's just one other thing. The question that Steve just asked about the board and its ability to function in these next few months, the approved motion conditionally approving withdrawal that you issued in May does say that between the date it was issued and July 1 of 2022, the district would exist for meeting each of the conditions outlined below and transitioning to full operations. So again, this is, you might want to amend that, and it might be that the attorneys for Ripton and the ACSD advise them that they can't really continue unless you amend that in some way. But I think that if that's read in a very general way and expansive way, and if everyone feels comfortable with it, then that probably covers the school board to be able to go through with these conversations and be at least discussing ways of moving forward.
Thank you for that clarification, Donna. And it is helpful actually that Ripton has actually has a formal school district. So there's clearly some agency here to speak from. So, okay, so I think I heard November 5th is a reporting deadline. Back to the board with a presentation and discussion at our November meeting. And again, I want to stress that, if you feel like you need more time, indicate progress made in the report and be prepared to provide a report out at November. And, we can come back. I want to get this right. I just want to, everybody on the board, my board colleagues, is everybody copacetic with this approach? Okay. So just a quick straw poll, a show of hands for this as a general approach. Is everybody in favor? Just please raise your hand. Okay. I didn't see everybody's hand go up, but any opposition? Okay, I'm not seeing any opposition, so I think the board unanimously is endorsing this approach forward. And again, just to recap or go back to the ACSD and Ripton, I want to see, just confirm, do you, both parties, do you feel good about this as a path forward?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. I really just want to thank everyone involved in a really challenging situation we find ourselves in. And I thought this was a really very productive conversation. And everybody who participated provided a great deal of value. And I'm hopeful that we're going to get to a good place here. And just know that, personally, as the leader of the board, and I think I can speak on behalf of my colleagues that, we are really committed to helping get to a good outcome for everyone involved, most importantly, the kids in your community. Steve, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you to the State Board of Ed for this conversation today. I realize it has taken up a lot of your agenda, but myself and the rest of the Ripton School Board certainly appreciate your willingness to engage with what is a challenging issue. So thank you very much.
Yep. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. So with that, we are slightly behind schedule, and we actually need to reverse the train. I'll take back my comment about keeping the trains on time. Clearly, I've not succeeded at that today, but I think for all the right reasons. So with that, we're going to return back to item I, and I'd like to see if we still have our friends from Westminster, Windham Northeast Union Elementary School District, and hopefully someone from the supervisory union on the line.
We do. This is Cheryl Charles, and we have both the chair of the board and the interim superintendent. And I think we might start with Addison West Clark, who is the chair of the board.
Okay, excellent. So at this time, Donna, Suzanne, Maureen, whomever can put the motion on the screen for us to review. I want to make sure that all parties are clear on what action the board is going to take here. And Donna, if you wouldn't mind walking us through the language, and then absent of, I'm just going to make sure that the three parties from the community are all supportive and understand what we're doing. And then, assuming that to be the case, I'm going to ask a member of the board to offer these motions. So Donna, the floor is yours.
The first motion is very, very similar to the conditional motion. It deals with final approval of Westminster's withdrawal and reconstitution as its own fully operational town school district for pre-K through 8 on July 1 of 2022. The only changes are to acknowledge some of the suggestions that were made about making sure that the school board was able to do the things that it needs to do to get ready, and making sure that's very clear. So the first motion would be that you would find that the conditions that were in your conditional approval have been met, and that pursuant to the statute that governs the withdrawal from a Union Elementary School District, which is 721A without a parenthesis, you would approve the request of Westminster to withdraw from the Union Elementary School District. You would, and I'm sorry, let me just back up. This is using the language that is from 721 about approvals or declarations. So approve the withdrawal, declare that withdrawal is effective on July 1 of 2022, and declare that the Westminster School District is reconstituted as a pre-K-8 district, that this reconstituted district would assume sole responsibility for the education of those students on July 1, 2022, and that between the date of this action of yours and July 1 of 2022, The district and its elected board would exist solely for the purpose of performing those duties necessary to transition to full operations next year. And then this is where the addition was added, including preparation and presentation of a proposed fiscal year 23 budget and planning for staffing needs for that first school year. So then the second motion would be the assignment of Westminster. I'm sorry, let me just go back to number 2C3. This would mean that during that period of time, the Union Elementary School District continues to be responsible for the education of students pre-K through 8 who live in Westminster. So the second motion would be the assignment of Westminster to the Windham Northeast SU. So, and again, this is following to the extent possible the language that is in 16 VSA 261, under which you have full authority to adjust supervisory union boundaries. It says that the State Board of Education would adjust the boundaries of the current WNSU in order to include the Westminster School District. And that would happen instantly because there's no date set on that. However, the second point of this motion is that July 1, 2022 would be the date on which the enlarged SVSU would be fully operational. And that number 3, you would authorize the board of the Westminster School District to appoint its 3 members to the SU board anytime after today. And that, however, that during this interim, what we've been calling transitional period between today and July 1 of 2022, those 3 appointed members would have the authority to vote solely on the matters that affect the budgets and the budget planning for fiscal year 2023 and after. And it was represented in the letters that you received that it seemed to be believed that the chair of the WNSU would be perfectly able and, trusted to be making that determination about whether or not it is a matter that they can vote upon. And then the second point of paragraph 3 would be that the members appointed would then have full voting rights on and after July 1, 2022, when they become a fully operational school district.
Okay, everybody have that committed to memory? So I want to keep this short and sweet if we can. Folks from the 3 entities involved, are there any objections or concerns with the language that Donna has just presented?
Jess, that means you.
I have no concerns.
Okay. And we have that with reverb. So I think that's clear. I'm not hearing any concerns. So I think we can now proceed to a member of the board offering the first one as a motion to put on the table, and we can have further discussion if need be, but let's at least get a motion on the table. So Kim, I see your hand is up.
I'm going to put it on the table, and then I just had a clarification. So I'm assuming I don't need to read through it, and I'm not scrolling, and I didn't have my tab up separately, but I make the motion as presented for the first portion of the presented proposal. I don't know if that's adequate.
Nope, I think that covers it. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Tom Lovett. Okay, discussion on the first piece.
So the question, if it's okay that I go, that I had was related to the planning for staffing needs, the very last piece for the 2022-2023 academic year. I'm presuming that to mean staffing needs for that newly constituted school district. not for the broader SU, but rather the authority would lie in budget planning for that SD and staffing needs for that SD.
Donna, did you want to respond to that?
I believe that that would be the case. It's within the context of the motion that is dealing with it becoming its own school district and becoming fully operational as its own school district, as opposed to the motion that deals with it as a member of an SU. So I think that it would, and I think that that would be a fair assumption that that is what it stands for and is intended to stand for.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Breyer, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd want a little clarification on that because we were anticipating hiring a new full-time superintendent, probably to take effect as of July 1. And I'm wondering if under this, the Westminster folks would not be allowed to be voting members for that decision. It seems like they should logically have that power, since it would be a person taking over as of the time that they become operational.
At this time, I'm going to ask the secretary to weigh in here because of the resignation. There's actually some underlying statute that governs the reappointment of superintendents, and I suspect the secretary may have a thing or two to say on this topic.
Yeah, thanks. Not specifically to the configuration of the board, but as secretary, I have to review the request to and approve the request to start a search process for a superintendent. So I can certainly work closely with the district and the board to ensure the process works for all the members, including future members.
Thank you. Donna, any additional comments regarding Mr. Breyer's question?
I think that as written, there would be nothing in that second motion that would, first of all, preclude the 3 appointed members from Westminster from discussing and being a part of that decision to hire a new superintendent. I don't think that they would, as a separate school district, have the authority under this language to vote on that new superintendent, except to the extent that, and I think that this is fairly reasonable, that it could potentially affect budgets and budget planning for the following year. So I think it would be up to them to decide perhaps the full expanse of their ability to vote, but they would have the full ability to participate in the decision.
Okay. Mr. Breyer, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm interpreting that as that there's some discretion with the chair of the SU board on the matter, but that otherwise, I think I got the gist of it.
Okay. Kim?
Sorry, I thought what I was hearing Donna say is simply to the extent, and the second, which we are not discussing now, the second motion speaks to matters that, as determined by the NSU chair, and we should probably wait on that anyway. So yeah. Going back to the first motion, and to Donna's clarification, these are budget and staffing matters. This interim board, or the board operating between now and July 1st, has the responsibility of presenting to the voters the fiscal year budget and plans for staffing needs for their SD. And that's what this motion says. I just want to be clear. And if I'm not getting that right, then I think we should either clarify, because that's what
I don't know if you were waiting. I'm sorry, I don't know if you were waiting for me to respond. Yes, I believe that that is the case, that this first motion is talking about it as a school district and and the school board's authority within the school district.
Okay. Any other questions on the first motion? Okay, I'd like to move this to a vote. The motion's been made, it's been seconded. We've had some discussion, and just to be clear, we are voting on the language in section 1 on the first half of the page in front of us. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read through the whole all the language. I think everybody's clear on what this is. So at this time, I am going to ask all those in favor of adopting the motion as presented to please signify by saying yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Okay, and those opposed, please signify by saying no. Any abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have adopted the first motion as presented on the screen. So now at this time, I would entertain a motion to adopt the second motion on as presented on the screen here.
I'll move.
It's been moved by Jen Samuelson. Is there a second?
And second.
It's been seconded by Lyle Jepson. Is there any discussion? Kim.
I think I just want to go back to clarity around what I'm understanding the language to say, that the discretion of the chair is related to matters only affecting budget and budget planning for that year and those years after. And
Donna?
that otherwise full voting rights begin July 1, 2022.
Yep.
Correct.
Donna?
Correct.
Thank you. Tom?
Thank you.
And I'm assuming that the discussion about hiring the new superintendent would affect the budget and would be part of those conversations as well.
Donna?
I think that that's a reasonable assumption. And also, as I said, I don't think that there's anything that would preclude those three members from participating in discussions, even if there was some particular thing they couldn't vote on.
Okay. Cheryl, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, this has to do with the previous discussion about ESSER funding, and there are decisions to be made in the next, before November 1, which is our next deadline. So I'm wondering about the authority to make decisions related to expenditures that would begin before July 1, 2022.
Donna, did
And this is, yeah, this is Donna again. As if the expenditures are to be made before, the school district isn't fully operational until July 1 of 2022. The Union Elementary School District is and provides services to the students who live in Westminster. And there's nothing that would preclude the SU board members from Westminster to participate in conversations. So I believe that it's appropriate for the Westminster School Board appointees to be able to participate, but the interests of their children for this current fiscal year are protected by the appointees from the Union Elementary School District, which is responsible for their education until July 1 of 2022.
Okay. Excellent. Any other questions? So just to recap, this is the assignment of Westminster to the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union. I haven't heard anybody suggest that we assign them to the ACSD, so that's a good thing. So with that, I will I'm going to call this for a vote. So all those in favor of adopting the motion as presented on the bottom half of the screen regarding the assignment of Westminster to the Windham Northeast SU, please signify by saying yes.
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 Those opposed, please signify by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Alrighty, the motion appears to have carried. The motion has carried. You've adopted the motion. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the folks from Westminster and Windham Northeast and the SU for your participation and your input. And apologies, we had to put you at the back of the train here, but hopefully you can appreciate it. We wanted to make sure we had everybody's input. So with that, we do have some remaining items on the agenda, but we are sadly out of time. So Dan, I do want to give you a little bit of space, maybe just a minute or two, if there are any pressing issues that you wanted to update the board on, and then I'd like to move to adjourn.
Yeah, thanks. Not especially. I will say, much of the conversation I was doing today was sort of a preview of what I hope would be a larger conversation at the board's retreat. So happy to withhold or hold on to those items until we have more time to get into them in more detail.
Okay. Thank you. So a couple other things from me before we consider adjournment, just under the heading of planning. I've had some discussions with Tammy Kolbe, and unless there's objection, I plan to appoint her to the Roles and Responsibilities Committee to assist with that work. So again, absent objection, I plan to move forward with that. Secondly, I did have a conversation with the co-chairs of the Act 1 study group and received an update on their work and regarding the implementation of the Ethnic Studies Bill. Long story short, they are sort of in the final stages of their work with various stakeholders. They anticipate coming before the board in sort of the October-November timeframe. So I've asked them to begin to send some pre-material to the board and would like to get an update, I think, in the October meeting with the idea that we would formally initiate the rulemaking in sort of November, December timeframe. So again, my preference is always to sort of telegraph our actions in as far advance as possible, so there are no surprises. So I just want you all to know that that train is on the tracks and it's headed in our direction here in the next few months. So any closing comments or questions from board members? Jen?
Have we picked a location for the retreat yet?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
So I need to follow up on that. Okay. Well, I just want to thank all of you for your patience and your diligence and attention. We obviously went we didn't go off script, but we certainly went over our allotted time, but I think it was all to the good. And again, as I indicated earlier, I am cautiously optimistic that we can help bring this Ripton situation to a good outcome. And I think look forward to seeing how this evolves. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Before you do that, Oliver,
yes.
Your guidance through that conversation was spot on. Thank you. The Ripton conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, is there a motion?
With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'm entertaining the motion.
Oh, you entertain it. I'll move it. Whatever you want me to do. I got to go at 12:30.
Is there a second? Okay, Kim has seconded the motion. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying yes.
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 And those opposed, no. Alrighty, the ayes have it, and we stand in adjournment. Thank you so much for your work, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.